Hey guys. This story is from the same author of the 2000 Years series, so you know this will be good. This is what if Naruto was Azula's bodyguard. Naruto is banished from Konoha but gives them the slip and boards a ship. Soon after, he is shipwrecked on Ember Island and is saved by Azula. 3 years later, Naruto is Azula's bodyguard while she hunts for the Avatar. But did he see the last of Konoha? Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 1, Shipwrecked and Water Tribe. Location, Konoha. Inside the council room, several people stood as a blonde-haired woman sat before a boy with a brighter shade of yellow. While the younger blondes simply sat in silence, the village council could not keep their smiles contained, satisfied at what they see as the village outcast finally getting his punishment. Of course, when asking either the civilian or shinobi member of the council what the crime was, they gave their own version. Has the council reached a verdict regarding Genin Uzumaki? Tsunade asked one of the civilian members, who promptly stood up. His smug grin was open for all to see. We have, Hokage-sama, he smirked. We find the defendant, guilty of all charges. He sat down, satisfied with the verdict that he and his fellow civilian members had given. She looked down at the blonde shinobi. Naruto Uzumaki, because of your crimes against Sasuke Uchiha, you are banished from Konoha. You will be placed in jail until the fire daimyo arrives. Once he does, your chakra will be sealed, and you will never be allowed to return to the village unless we order you to come back. She looked at the ANBU in the room, standing silently in the back. ANBU, take him. Both the civilian and shinobi council watched as Naruto was led away. They had expected him to protest, say it wasn't his fault, or ask why the Hokage was doing this, all in a loud voice. But Naruto did not react when his punishment was given, and he walked out being gently, but firmly led by the ANBU. While the civilians were celebrating, the shinobi looked at each other. They all felt that something was wrong, but they just did not know what it was. Naruto sat on the poor excuse for a bed. The lumps underneath would have made sleeping very uncomfortable. That went as expected, he said. He showed no emotion during the so-called trial because he knew what was going to happen long before that. Yes, it did. Are you still going to leave? The Biju inside him asked. Is that a rhetorical question, Kyubi? He asked back with a blank expression. Ever since he found out what would happen, he tried to keep his emotion clamped down tight. So far it was working quite well. The fox smirked. Fair enough, Gaki. Let me rephrase that. When are you going to leave? The blonde looked out the tiny window in his cell. Soon enough, he answered, looking at the night sky beyond the bars. Tsunade watched the sun go down from the window in the Hokage's office. As Shizen came through the door, Tsunade turned to her. Is everything ready? She asked her apprentice, who nodded in answer. She got out of the Hoke's chair. Let's go get Naruto. The two left her office and headed down to the jail. After Naruto came back with Sasuke, the civilian council had all but exploded at the Uchiha's battered condition and demanded Naruto's execution. She, along with Jiraiya and the Shinobi Council, tried to figure out a way to stop that from happening. The elders came up with a plan. Naruto would be banished, but they would wait for the fire daimyo to come to Konoha to banish him, to make it look official. However, what would really happen was Naruto would be secretly smuggled out of Konoha and given to Jiraiya, who would then train him for as long as he could, until Konoha needed him again. The civilian council only knew of the banishment part, which made them happy enough. Seeing as it was the best idea voiced, it was agreed on. Once Naruto was out of the village and safely with Jiraiya, Tsunade would secretly pass the real information of what actually happened to the daimyo and Konoha's allies were, especially Suna, because of Gaara. Naruto's teammates would be told once it came close for the blonde to return. But first they had to get him out. The first step began tonight. As Tsunade entered the jail, Shizen following behind, she motioned the guard, actually an ANBU agent informed of the plan, to leave. He nodded in acknowledgement, and silently left the room. She went to Naruto's cell and pulled out the key. Naruto, she called out. He turned from the window to her. We're getting you out of here. She opened the gate and motioned Naruto to come out. But he stayed put. Come on, Naruto, we don't have much time. They had to get him out soon. Otherwise, someone was bound to find out. He stood up, didn't move from that spot. Instead, he threw the Hokage a glare that was both angered and hurt. That's where you're wrong, Tsunade, Naruto said coldly. He reached up and untied his headband. You're wrong about the fact of not having much time. You didn't have any time to begin with. The headband fell to the floor, crashing loudly. At the same time, he disappeared in a plume of smoke. Shizen stared the smoke in the cell. It was a Kage Bunshin, shadow clone? She asked, not believing what she saw. Tsunade could only silently nod. She was just as stunned. We have to send the ANBU squads out immediately. She rushed for the door. Tsunade followed a step behind. But even as she ran, there was a sick feeling in her stomach. Whatever they did, it would be too late. Naruto was gone. Location Naruto. Naruto smiled as he stared out at the sea. He had done it. He gotten out without anyone finding him. When he brought Sasuke back to the village, he quickly found out that the civilian council wanted him executed. After discovering what Tsunade had been planning to do with him, he decided to take a page out of Orochimaru's, Itachi's, and recently Sasuke's book. He made the choice to sever all connections with Konoha, but he also knew that just walking out the front gates would not be a good plan. In fact, it was an idiotic plan. So, with some advice from the Kyuubi, the day before he was brought before the Hokage, he made a Kage Bunshin, and sent it out as far as he could from Konoha. While he was in jail, Naruto used the Kawarimi, body replacement, with the clone, swapping places. Once he was out, he ran as fast he could to the nearest port in the Land of Fire. It took him 3 days to reach it, and each was filled with watching everything for possible attacks. Once he reached the port, he signed on a deckhand on the first ship he came upon. As luck would have it, the ship was leaving the elemental countries. He didn't breathe easily until the Land of Fire disappeared from the horizon. The ship was now a month at sea and the elemental countries were far behind them. That was very slick, Naruto, Kyuubi complimented him. The fox always knew that if his Jinchuriki applied himself, the feats that he would be able to achieve would be quite impressive, like slipping out of Konoha's notice and being able to successfully evade them. Of course, he did help the blonde, but he had no doubt that with a little more practice, his Jinchuriki wouldn't need any help. I do try to please, Naruto replied, as he kept looking out at the sea. He knew that he was supposed to be working, but the sight stunned him. He was amazed by its beauty. It seemed tranquil and peaceful. But that was soon forgotten when he saw a dark smudge on the horizon. It ruined the image. Any idea on what that is out there, Kyuubi? I'm not an expert on what happens at Shigaki. It's probably nothing, he said dismissively. Naruto's boss, an experienced sailor called Shin, came over and started shouting at him for not working. He noticed the smudge, and the tirade promptly vanished. Instead, he swore loudly and told Naruto to get moving. That was a storm and it was approaching fast. He turned and ran, shouting for the captain. All the while, the smudge rapidly filled the skies, coming towards them like a black hand. Everyone on the deck scrambled to get below once the captain blew the warning whistle. By then it was too late. The storm hit the ship and hit it hard. The deck turned slippery as the rain pounded down. Naruto felt blinded by the rain, unable to see where anything was. His ears were plugged by the wind's howling and the sea matching its tone. He tried to reach the deck hatch but couldn't find it, thanks to the rain. It seemed like he was the only person on deck now. When he thought he found the door, it turned out to be the prow. He was on the wrong end of the ship. He started to turn but a wave swept over the deck. It was sudden and pushed him over the side. He tried to grab something, anything that would keep him safe, but his hands only found air. The last thing he heard was the fox screaming, "Stay awake, Naruto. Stay awa dash." Location, Ember Island. Azula walked along the beach, annoyed. She had no idea why her father decided to send both her and her brother Zuko, as well as Mai and Ty Lee, with her uncle Iroh to Ember Island for a vacation. It was getting unbearable with Ty Lee being overly cheerful, her uncle doing nothing but drink tea, and Zuko and Mai being awkward around each other. If she stayed there any longer, she would be tempted to set everything on fire, although, with Iroh there, it probably wouldn't get that far. She sighed in frustration. Things had changed when her father became the Fire Lord and her mother had disappeared. She had gotten even better at firebending. People were calling her a prodigy before, now they looked at her with awe. She was being taught by the best firebenders that were out there, including her father, and while she progressed, Zuko floundered. She had gained his approval and Zuko, despite being the eldest, did not. But she resented her brother for always being with their mother. Azula always wanted her mother to show her that she was loved as well. But she always paid more attention to Zuko, and that had irritated Azula to no end. She heard someone coming behind her. It was Ty Lee. No one else had a spring in their step that was so audible. Azula suppressed a groan. As much as Ty Lee was her friend, she really didn't want to deal with her right now. "Hey Azula!" called out Ty Lee. "Why are you out?" Her voice trailed into silence. That wasn't like her. Azula looked back at her and saw her pointing out to the water. Somebody had washed up on shore. Azula ran over to check. The first thing she noticed was that it was a boy about Zuko's age, maybe a little older. The second thing was that he was still breathing, somewhat. "Ty Lee, go and get my uncle," she ordered. "This boy is injured." He was bleeding from the head. Ty Lee nodded and ran back to the house. Azula looked closer at the boy, taking in details. He had blonde hair, which was uncommon, if not outright rare, in the Bending countries. It reminded her of the sun. He had a natural tan and 6 strange birthmarks, 3 on each side of his face. They almost looked like whiskers. How strange. Hearing footsteps on the sand, she saw her uncle coming towards her. He knelt to examine the boy. "Azula, go back to the house and get your brother to help you make a bed ready," Iroh said after looking the boy over. He didn't sound like his usual tea-loving self, but the general he used to be. She nodded once and ran back to the house. Naruto awoke to the sound of waves crashing on a shoreline. It sounded gentler than the waves in the storm. As he sat up, he noticed that somebody was sitting next to the bed. It was an old man who had a friendly look. "Ah, you are awake, that is good," he said. Naruto looked around to figure out where he was. But all he saw was that he was in a house that was near the beach. Where? He started before a wave of nausea hit him and forced him back down onto the bed. But the old man understood what he had tried to ask. "You are on Ember Island in my brother's beach house." "My name is Iroh," he answered, pointing to himself. "What is your name?" He sounded curious, but there was also a tone of caution. The blonde managed to sit up again, slowly. This time, he wasn't by nausea. "My name is Naruto." "How did I get here?" he asked. "The last thing I remember was being swept into the sea when a storm hit my ship." Iroh looked at him understandingly. "My niece found you when you washed up on shore. You managed to get a bad injury on your head." Naruto checked and found the injury. He winced at the small pain from his prodding. "In that case, I think I should thank your niece for saving my life." Iroh smiled. "I will tell her that. In the meantime, you should get some rest. I will be back with some tea." He stood up and walked out of the room. "Nice to see you in the land of the living again, Kit," the Kyuubi spoke once he was certain they were alone. "You almost had me worried there. If his Jinchuriki died, he died too. He liked living, even if it came this way." "How long was I out, Kyuubi?" Naruto asked, being all business. He kept his voice low so no one else could hear him. "You were out for 2 days since you washed ashore. We were lucky. The ship was close to this island when the storm struck. If you hadn't drifted here during the night, you would have been a dead person." What he didn't say was that he practically ran himself ragged trying to make sure his Jinchuriki hadn't died before then. "Well, it's a good thing we washed up here then. I guess you're right about that. But the question I have, Gaki, is what are you going to do now?" As Iroh came back with tea, Naruto finished the conversation silently. "What we are going to do is stay here now." Location: Fire Nation capital. Fire Lord Ozai looked at the 12 young men kneeling before him. These men were in the Fire Nation's military, and were some of the best. After Ozai had scarred Zuko and banished him with the impossible task of finding the Avatar, there had been several attempts on his daughter's life by Earth Kingdom assassins. The last attempt would have been successful had a sentry not saw the attack and sounded the alarm. While Azula was recovering, Ozai did something he never would have thought he would do again. He contacted Iroh, who had gone with Zuko, and asked him for his advice. His brother had sent a reply proposing that Azula be given a bodyguard. He had even recommended someone, even though the two of them had only met the year before. Ozai agreed with the proposal and immediately looked for the most talented firebenders in the military to fill the role. And now those 11 were right in front of him, the 12th being Iroh's recommendation and was the only non-bender there. He had to be there, since Ozai agreed with his brother's suggestion. While the 11 were fairly well-known and respected officers in the army, the 12th was a common soldier and was often a problem, disobeying orders, protecting civilians and other nonsense. But the odd thing was that the soldiers had more respect for him than the other 11. Still, that was beside the point now. "You are all here because you have been given an opportunity," Ozai said, looking down on them. "You have the chance of becoming Princess Azula's bodyguard. You will be her shield against all threats to her." The 11 officers looked at him with excitement, as they should. This was indeed a great opportunity for them. It was the chance to bring more honor and prestige to their families. But the 12th remained silent. Now I have decided that there will be a test to decide who will protect Azula, the Fire Lord continued. There will be a tournament, and the winner will become the bodyguard. The 11 officers nodded in agreement, while the 12th shook his head. Do you disagree with this plan, boy? Ozai asked with a slightly dangerous tone. There were only a very few, who would dare disagree him. He nodded once, looking up. Yes, Fire Lord Ozai, I do. It's pointless to fight among ourselves. Why don't the 12 of us fight an Agni Kai against Princess Azula herself? That way, we would be able to prove ourselves to her, he suggested. Ozai thought it over. He was willing to admit that the plan did have its merits. Very well then, the 12 of you will fight against my daughter in an Agni Kai. It will begin in 4 hours. The 12 stood up, bowed to Ozai, and left for the stadium. When he was alone, Ozai chuckled to himself. The poor fool Iroh had recommended would not last 5 minutes against his daughter. She was a fire-bending prodigy, while he could not bend at all. It wouldn't be a problem for Azula to beat him, and that was a sight Ozai was looking forward to. The stadium's audience buzzed with excitement. Princess Azula would be fighting an Agni Kai against 12 opponents. Such a task had never been done before, but everyone was absolutely sure that Azula could do it. She was, after all, a fire-bending prodigy. The princess herself was completely focused on it. Those who were challenging her would bite the dust. She didn't need a guard, and she was going to prove that. The gong sounded, signaling the start. Azula rose from her kneeling position and turned to face her opponents. 11 of them wore the skull-like helmet of a firebender, and, judging by their armor, were officers. But the 12th was just a soldier, and not even a firebender, judging by his conical helmet. As soon as she was done analyzing them, she took her stance. 11 of her opponents took that as the sign to attack. It took a combination of tricky maneuvering and exceptional firebending, but Azula defeated them. Once they were down, she turned her attention to the last. Her form was perfect, her control was precise. But no matter what she did, he would always manage to avoid her attacks. She bent fireball after fireball at him, trying to burn him to a crisp, but all he ever did was step out of the way. After a few more minutes of this, Azula looked at her opponent. Are you just going to stand over there, or will you actually try to fight me? She asked angrily. He looked at her for a moment, and Azula thought he looked a little familiar. While she was distracted by that thought, he got in close. It quickly proved effective. Every time Azula tried to use close combat firebending, her opponent would block the attacking limb. No matter what she did, she couldn't break past his defense. Azula realized why he did not attack with the others. He was observing how she fought, and where her weak points were. He knew how to fight her, more importantly, how to block her. It angered her, making her fight harder. But the more she fought, the more she started to feel tired. Her breath, which she controlled perfectly, lapsed. That's when he attacked, sweeping legs out from under, causing her to fall and hit the tiles. He knelt down, pressing his knee to her stomach, holding a knife to her throat, and using the other hand to pin her wrists. It was over, she had lost. After a few seconds passed, he withdrew his knife and released her wrists, letting Azula get back on her feet. As much as she wanted to attack, she knew she couldn't, not with everyone watching. The Fire Lord landed in the stadium and approached them. Well done, soldier. You have beaten my daughter, a fire-bending prodigy, while you are not a bender yourself, he seemingly praised the soldier. Azula, because of his victory against you, this soldier is now your personal bodyguard. He will protect you with his life. Show your face to your princess, Ozai commanded the soldier. He reached for his helmet and took it off. Azula's eyes went wide as she stared. Your location, Northern Water Tribe. Run for your life, was the general phrase the Fire Nation soldiers were screaming as they ran back to their ships. They were trying to escape the giant fish-like monster the Avatar had created out of water. As they retreated, they saw a person in a black cloak with the hood up. If they took the time to stop and look, they would have known who he was. But they were more focused on saving their lives. The cloaked man didn't care that they didn't notice. He walked past them, keeping his eyes on the monster. Once he was close, the monster noticed him. It swung its arm, either to swat or drown him. He settled into a stance, moved his hands and drew out his jian. He swung his sword once and the monster's arm simply fell off. It reeled back as he sheathed the jian. He had the chance to press the attack, but before he did anything, he felt a familiar presence by his side and stayed silent. "Allez!" An ethereal voice rang out, getting the monster's attention. "What do you think you're doing?" The people of the Water Tribe looked on in fear as the voice continued. Have you forgotten what Toei was supposed to guard? You were supposed to make sure she did not die. You are her guardian. Now she is dead and you are out here trying to take revenge when what you should be back there trying to find a way to fix the balance. You will get your watery ass back to that oasis, right now. I will clean up this mess. Now go! The voice roared at the giant monster. Once what he had said had gotten through, the cloaked person moved on quickly to his next target. As Zuko and Zhao fought against each other, they saw that the giant monster suddenly melt down and retreat back to the oasis. What is going on? Zuko asked in wonder. His paws allowed Zhao to punch him in the chest, knocking him to the ground. My troops were successful in destroying that thing, Zhao declared triumphantly as he stood over his opponent. Soon they will destroy the Water Tribe for good, and my name will be remembered forever. But while he seemed certain in his victory, it earned him a scornful laugh. They both looked up and saw the cloaked person leaning against the doorway. How very wrong of you, Zhao, he said. As of right now, the ships from the Fire Nation are heading back to safe waters. The invasion failed. Your name will be forgotten, Zhao. And your life is forfeit. Zhao's face went dead white, paling in fear. He ran away, rushing past Zuko. I love it when they run, the cloaked man said with a smile as he went after him, leaving behind a bewildered Zuko. Sokka stared at the two fish circle each other. The ocean spirit had come back to the oasis and melted back into the pond, leaving Aang on the grass. Zuko arrived shortly after, only to find the Avatar unconscious with Katara and Sokka there as well as his uncle. Aang woke up shortly afterwards. Zuko and Iroh decided to take their leave at that point, but were interrupted when Zhao ran back into the oasis with a terrified expression. Someone, please hide me! He half screamed, surprising everyone. It literally looked like he was scared for his life. At that moment all they saw was a blur, and suddenly the cloaked person was behind Zhao with his Jian out. Admiral Zhao, for your incompetence and blatant stupidity, you will die, he said in an official voice. Before anyone could stop him, he plunged his Jian through Zhao's neck. As he tried to pull it, it got stuck. He tried to wiggle it loose but instead it snapped in half. Damn it, not another one, he muttered as he looked at the ruined half in his hand. As Zhao's body fell, he dropped it as well. Aang had watched the entire scene with horrified eyes. Why did you do that? He was defenseless and scared. You didn't need to kill him, he cried angrily, a furious expression on his face. He might have disliked Zhao, but he never would have killed him, especially when he was like that. The person said nothing in response. He only walked forward, like he was going to take Aang. But he was blocked by Sokka, his boomerang out and ready to use. Move, boy, he told him. Sokka just shook his head. Move, he said again, putting an edge in his voice. Look, pal, I've been having a bad day. The Northern Water Tribe was invaded, the Moon Spirit was killed, and the girl that I liked gave up her life in order to become the new Moon Spirit. So pardon me if I'm not just going to roll over and let you take one of my friends, okay? Sokka asked in a half-sarcastic, half-deadly serious tone of voice. The man did nothing for a second, then he laughed. I can respect that, he finally said. He looked slightly up to the air. What do you think? He asked no one in particular. Even though there was no reply, he bowed his head slightly as if he heard one. He turned to leave when Iroh said, Hold a moment. He looked back at him. What do you want, old man? Iroh, completely unfazed by his rudeness, grinned. It's nice to see you again, Naruto. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the man sighed in resignation. Iroh, he greeted, lowering his hood. Zuko's eyes widened as he stared at the blonde. Iroh grew serious. Naruto, why are you here? He asked. He knew who the blonde served and he also knew that he wouldn't have come to the North Pole by himself, not unless he had a good reason. Why do you think I'm here? Naruto asked him back. He would have thought it was an obvious thing. His eyes widened in surprise. She sent you here? He never would have thought that she would do such a thing. But then again, he had not seen her in some time. The blonde nodded. She understands the need for balance. He maybe had a hand in that, but the end result was still the same thing. Iroh laughed. 2 years ago, she would not have cared if the Moon Spirit was killed, only if the Northern Water Tribe had been conquered. Truly, it was remarkable how different she apparently was. You could say that I've been an influence on her. Zuko finally caught on. Wait, you don't mean, he started to say, but stopped when Naruto only nodded once. He just looked at him in disbelief. Hey kid, what's your name? Naruto asked Sokka, turning his attention back to the tribesman. My name isn't Kid, Sokka told him indignantly. It's Sokka of the Southern Water Tribe. Well then, Sokka, it will be interesting to have you on board, Naruto told him. Just try to keep him on a short leash from now on, huh? He asked, indicating Aang with his eyes. What he said was confused to the tribesman, but before he could ask what he meant, the blonde had turned to leave again. He walked away, leaving the Zhao's corpse behind, and was halfway to the exit when the Avatar landed in front of him. You didn't answer my question, why did you kill him? Aang demanded, pointing to Zhao's body. Do you not care about human life? Naruto looked at the Avatar, who was shaking with righteous anger. This is coming from you? He asked with ice-cold eyes. You, a coward who shirked his duty and murderer, would actually say something like that? Aang stiffened. I am not a coward or a murderer. You are those things, boy. He all but spat out the last word. When you were told you were the Avatar, instead of stepping up, you ran away and hid for 100 years, while this war went on. You betrayed your own people with those actions. Aang faltered a little. Those words did hit a little close for him. What the blonde said was true, he did run away. But he didn't know what it had felt like back then, how it felt to be betrayed by the monks. I'm not a murderer. Naruto smirked like he had caught the Avatar in a trap. So you are the last airbender just by coincidence? Aang took a step back like he had been slapped. And the blonde took a step forward. But he didn't say anything else, or even try to attack. He just walked past the Avatar like he was unimportant. Aang fell down to the ground as the question repeated itself again and again. Its implications drew up memories of what he did repeated over and over again in his mind. All of a sudden, all he could see was how the Fire Nation destroyed his people, why he wasn't there to do anything about it. He felt Katara and Sokka by his side. They were talking but he couldn't hear the words. While the Avatar's friends tried to make sure he was alright, Zuko and Iroh took the chance to leave the oasis as well as the Northern Water Tribe. Location: Fire Nation capital. Azula walked into her room with purpose. Her father had given her a task to do, one she would accomplish. She started to pack, making sure that she took everything she needed. So what did the royal flaming asshole want you to do? A voice asked her from a shadow against the wall. It would have surprised and or sacred anyone else, but Azula had lived with it for 2 years now, so she had gotten used to it. That's Fire Lord Ozai to you, Naruto, she told her bodyguard, who stepped out of the shadows. Naruto had grown in the past 3 years. He had lost the rest of his baby fat, giving him a more mature look. His hair had grown out a bit, giving him a wild look, and had put a good deal of muscle on his body. All in all, Naruto had turned into someone that girls paid attention as he walked by. Add in his politeness and his manners, and he had fangirls wherever he went, something he did not appreciate. But that was only girls. Azula's father and her bodyguard did not see eye to eye often and didn't agree on a lot of things. Because of Naruto's unique position, he was allowed a seat on the war council despite being a common soldier, which also irritated Ozai to no end. What further irritated the Fire Lord was that during the war council, Naruto would often oppose him when a plan for the war front was passed. He would give his solution to the plan, or come up with his own. His plan would save lives while also gaining territory in the Earth Kingdom. Because of his plans, the soldiers all loved and respected him, while the officers took after Ozai and treated him with disdain. He just told them that he didn't want to lose anyone else, having lost a lot of people while fighting in the war. You say fire, I say flambe, Naruto replied with a grin. She huffed in annoyance. Why do you still do that? She asked, referring to him talking from the shadows. He did that to her for the first couple of months the two of them were together. Old habit, Naruto answered with a shrug of his shoulders. He'd do it to sharpen her senses as well as make her develop a danger sense. He would throw things at her if she didn't find him fast enough, and B, to freak her out and make her lighten up. She looked at the Jian he had. Is that a new one? She asked him with a raised eyebrow and a smirk. He frowned in annoyance. Yeah, it is. Grabbed it at some point during the week I spent coming back here. That was something odd about him. Every time he had a Jian, sooner or later it would somehow break. He was also pretty sure that there was a pool going on about how long a particular Jian would last and how it would be destroyed. But he didn't let his annoyance linger, becoming serious as he refocused on her. What did he want you to do? The Fire Lord wants me to hunt down and capture my uncle and Zuzu. He nodded once. I'll go grab the rest of my gear. He turned for the door. Azula stopped him. Naruto, why did you agree to go the North Pole? I told you only what I thought Zhao would do and I could have been wrong but you still went. Why? She knew that what Zhao had almost succeeded in doing would have been disastrous. But for some reason, that was not the only reason her bodyguard was willing to go up to the North Pole. Naruto looked back at her. I went to stop Chao from doing something stupid, but I had a different reason for doing that than you, he said cryptically. Naruto? She called out. You won't leave me alone, will you? She asked with a slight fear in her voice. She hated how weak she sounded at that moment. She knew that something was happening to her, but she didn't know what it was. She still had her devious and cruel edge, but there were times where she thought that everyone would leave her, and she would be alone and not wanted or loved. That thought scared Azula to no end. That's why she asked Naruto. He had been with her for 2 years, had been a friend as well as a bit of a teacher to her, so she was terrified if he would actually leave her. He walked back over to her. Before she could object, he pulled her into a hug. I told you this before, he said to her, his voice soothing. I will always be there with you, even when you don't need or want me. I swore to protect you, no matter what it may cost me. I'm your servant, your protector, and your friend. Remember that, Azula, and you will never be alone. Azula gave a small smile. When she stepped away from the hug, she was back to normal. Weren't you going to go grab your gear? She asked pointedly. Naruto laughed. Alright, I'll go now. One more thing, Naruto. Did you see my uncle and Zuzu in the Northern Water Tribe? He stopped at the door. Yeah, I did, although I suspect that they have already left. I also met someone interesting, he replied, looking at her once more. Azula looked at him. Who was it? Someone who managed to land the same position I have without even recognizing it. Even though he used the word position, he wasn't talking about guarding Azula. He considered that a job. I'm guessing you aren't talking about the Avatar? His expression soured at the mention of him. No, not him. Someone else much more interesting. And what is so special about this boy? Azula asked. He smiled mysteriously. He isn't a bender. He left the room, leaving Azula to think about her task and how to do it. Already a plan was shaping in her mind. Chapter 2, Paragons and Family. Location, WTS Serene Moon. Sokka stood at the ship's prow, watching the water pass by. He was trying to think, but with what they were going up against, he was finding it hard to even concentrate. A brief pain in his leg appeared suddenly, like something was biting him. Instead of hopping around and yelling like he normally would have, he looked at said biter. I thought you stopped doing that to me, Akela, he said in good humor. The wolf pup's look said he was thinking too much. Sokka and Akela had not been with each other for long. Sokka was fishing outside of the city. He had excused himself so he would not feel completely useless since the reconstruction was being taken care of by waterbenders, Katara and Aang among them. He was fishing for sea crabs to bring more food. It made himself useful, in a little way. That was when he heard a whimpering noise coming from a nearby ice cave. He could barely hear it, but it was still there. He went to see what was making the noise and found a 4-month-old wolf pup laying next to a wolf that had been burned to death. Sokka immediately knew it was the pup's mother. As he neared the pup, it turned around and growled at him. Its fur was covered in soot and ash. He had been giving the pup a bath in the spirit oasis when Pakku and some of his students found him. What anger the waterbending master had at the scene transformed into shock when Sokka pulled the pup out of the water. The pup's fur was pure white. Sokka and Katara had been surprised too, but Aang was puzzled. Once he was told about the tribal myth of white wolves, he was surprised as the rest of the group. By then the pup had wormed his way into their hearts, so they decided to keep him. Sokka named the pup Akela, after the alpha wolf in the myth. Akela had gotten along well with Appa. When the two of them met for the first time, Appa had been sleeping. Akela simply jumped onto Appa's head, made himself comfortable and began sleep as well. According to Sokka, they now had a friendship that was made in sacred snoring. Akela and Momo did not have such an easy meeting. According to Katara, when Akela saw Momo, somehow he grinned like Sokka when he was hungry and saw something that had meat. This led to a grand merry chase throughout the city. By the time it had ended, Momo was hiding inside Aang's clothes and Sokka was telling Akela that if he could not have the winged lemur for dinner, then neither could he. After that, if Momo was irritating Akela, all Akela had to do was show him that same grin and Momo was gone quicker than you could blink. Akela pushed against Sokka's leg. He reached down and scratched Akela behind the ear. The pup was big enough to reach his kneecap and it looked like he was going to get bigger. I was just thinking about what we're up against, that's all, he told him. It was hard not to, considering who it was. Flashback. The prisoner was a Fire Nation seaman, part of the fleet that attacked the Northern Water Tribe. He was captured while trying to make it back to the ships. Both Pakku and Chief Arnuk interrogated him for information about the Fire Nation military forces and plans. but he responded only with silence and insults. After 4 hours, Pakku and Arnuk let Aang, Katara and Sokka talk to the prisoner, thinking the Avatar might be able to get some answers out of him, leaving them with a contingent of waterbenders. Aang and Katara did most of the talking while Sokka hung back and listened, but the prisoner just gave them the same treatment. "Well, what about you, little water tribe boy?" he finally asked Sokka. "Don't you have a method for pumping me for information?" Sokka thought about it briefly. He shook his head. "No, I won't do that." He did have a question though. "Do you know anything about a guy named Naruto?" The prisoner's head snapped up so quickly, some had hoped he had broken his neck. "How do you know about Lord Naruto?" he demanded. Sokka was a bit surprised at his reaction. He had honestly not been expecting it. "I was there when he killed Zhao." "What did you do to gain his attention?" "I stood in his way when he tried to take the Avatar and didn't move," he answered. "Where was this going?" The prisoner seemed surprised. "And he didn't kill you?" "No, he asked me my name, looked up to the sky, asked a question but didn't get a reply." "That's all?" "Well, he probably should not show what he had found in his pack that night, but he didn't know what else to do. He didn't get an answer, but I found this later." He pulled out a medallion with 4 strange symbols carved on it. On the top of the medallion was an upside-down triangle, while on the bottom was a normal triangle. On the right side of the medallion was an upside-down triangle with a line through it. On the left side was the same triangle with the line only right side up. Each of the symbols had lines connecting it to another symbol, either curving along the side or going straight down the middle. When he saw the medallion, the prisoner was stunned. He looked at his hands, manacled and chained to the ground, both made out of ice. He took a breath and then completely melted them by fire bending. Before anyone could attack, the prisoner knelt before Sokka, his head touching the ground. "Forgive me, Lord Sokka," he said. His voice was slightly muffled as it was coming up from the ground. Everyone was dumbstruck, but Sokka was able to recover quickly. "Why am I forgiving you?" he asked carefully. The prisoner brought his face up. "I ask for forgiveness because I did not believe your words about Lord Naruto." "It's okay, but I still want to know who this Naruto is and what this medallion is." "I do not know about the medallion itself. But the fact that you have it means that you are also a paragon," he explained, even though what he said did not really explain anything. Sokka grew confused. "A paragon, what is that?" he asked. "I cannot say. Only Lord Naruto can explain it to you." He almost sounded ashamed. Aang decided to interrupt. "What's so great about this Naruto anyway? From what I've seen of him, he is a murderer who doesn't even care about human life." Even since their meeting, the air nomad did not hold the blonde in that high of a regard. The prisoner leapt up, looking like he wanted to do some serious damage to Aang, perhaps even kill him. Sokka got in front of him. It was almost laughable, facing down a soldier like this. But he did it. "Stand down, soldier," he commanded, figuring that the soldier would respond to commands like that. The prisoner complied but glared at Aang. "I will not hear you slander Lord Naruto. Every time he fights in the field, he tries to make sure that everyone gets out alive. He tries to save lives while you cower and hide, Avatar. So shut your mouth." Katara was about to respond when Sokka looked at her and shook his head. Looking at the prisoner, he asked, "Can you talk about him?" If the soldier was willing to tell him information, it might help if they ever run into the blonde again. "Lord Naruto is the bodyguard of Princess Azula and the paragon of the Fire Nation," the soldier explained. "He's been given an honorary rank and commands respect from the soldiers, benders and non-benders alike. He leads his men personally into battle and has won many victories. He is able to fight and defeat a bender on equal grounds and has done so on many occasions, both within the Fire Nation military and the enemy." "Is he a bender himself?" That was the clincher. If this Naruto was a bender, then that meant he would be able to figure out a way to fight him. "No, he is not. Why would he consider my brother to be his equal? Shouldn't he be more worried about the Avatar?" Katara asked. The prisoner laughed at her. "Lord Naruto doesn't even consider the Avatar a threat. He believes that a person who runs away and lets his own people die is a weak coward with no honor." "I'm not weak or a coward," Aang protested. "You had to go into the Avatar state just to attack us with that giant water monster, and Lord Naruto was able to defeat you with one swing of his sword. You are a weak coward and have no honor. Therefore, Lord Naruto has no respect for you," he said derisively. Aang, feeling furious at such words, left. Katara quickly went after him. "Thank you," Sokka told the soldier. He walked away, allowing the nearby waterbenders shackle to the prisoner again. "You're slow, Aang," Pakku barked as his students trained. "Avatar or not, you need to be better if you want to pass my expectations." He noticed Katara looking at the stairs. Sokka was standing there, Akela beside him. "What do you want, Sokka?" he asked the young tribesman, walking over to him. "Sifu Paku, can we speak alone?" Sokka asked formally. He looked at him with a brief look of curiosity and confusion before nodding in agreement. "Practice your sets until I return," he told his students. He led Sokka down the steps through the city until they reached a secluded spot. "What is it that you want?" he asked as they stepped out of the sight. "I want you to teach me waterbending," Sokka told him. Paku started to laugh. It was something that he had never heard before. A person who wasn't a bender who wanted to learn how to waterbend. It was downright ridiculous. "You want me to teach you how to waterbend when you're not even a bender?" he asked rhetorically. "You would be an embarrassment to me and my teachings." He bowed his head. "I apologize, I meant that want you to teach me how to waterbend without bending," he tried to explain. The laughter stopped. "What are you talking about? You cannot waterbend without bending." Sokka silently cursed himself. He needed to explain this better. He could do that. "What I mean is please teach me the basic stances and sets for waterbending, that is all." Paku was silent as he looked at Sokka's bowed head. "Why?" "Because there is someone out there who might come after Aang and who is stronger, faster, better than me. And all I have is my machete, my club and my boomerang. You have forgotten about your intelligence and wits." What he lacked in waterbending ability, he made up greatly in smarts. Give him a few years to hone them and Paku was certain that few, very few, would be able to match wits against him. "That won't be enough to beat this guy," Sokka unexpectedly shouted, exasperated and annoyed at the fact that the older man was not getting his point. In the silence that followed, the two of them stared at each other. "Is there another reason for this request?" Paku asked with suspicion. Sokka nodded his head once. Reaching into his shirt, he pulled out the medallion he found. For some reason he just could not explain, he found himself more at ease wearing it. When the waterbending master saw it, his eyes went wide in shock and surprise. "I see," he said. He turned around and walked away. He stopped and looked back. "Just because you're not a bender doesn't mean that I'm going to be easy on you. In fact, I am going to push to your edge and then I am going to make you break that edge, got it?" His expression was hard, practically unforgiving. Sokka knew that meant his request had been granted. "Yes, Sifu Paku," he answered. As he followed Paku back to where the training ground, he tried to hide a smile from Paku. He wasn't sure if it worked. End flashback. That was a long month, Sokka said to himself. Paku hadn't been kidding when he said he was going to push Sokka to his edge. The man was relentless. Lesser men would have caved or run away, but Sokka was stubborn. He needed to do this, needed to know how to fight without his weapons should the time ever come when he did not have them. His stubbornness worked out in the end as he began to improve. He also began seeing how Aang moved when he was airbending. As he got better and better, earning some praise from Paku, for a reason unknown to him, he was also getting silent disapproval from Katara. Aang did not understand what Sokka was doing but did not object to it. Sokka looked at the night sky and saw the full moon. For a moment, he was reminded of you and felt a pang of guilt. "Come on, it's time we went to bed," he told Akela. He made his way to the stairs leading below deck with the pup trailing behind him. "And if you fart in my face again, you're sleeping in the crow's nest." The pup simply gave a challenging look. As the two of them walked to the stairs, Sokka saw Katara and Aang talking. He heard the words avatar and scary. He kept going, more intent on sleeping. The next morning, they were about head to an Earth Kingdom base before heading to Omashu. Both Katara and Aang had been given gifts from Paku and now Sokka stood before him. "Sokka," Paku started. "Your training has no doubt been one of my more unusual ones, but nonetheless you have also proven to be one of my best students, perhaps even better than your sister." He sighed. "My only disappointment is that you are not a waterbender. Had you been one, you would have one of the greatest benders this side of the world has ever seen." Sokka bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, Sifu Paku." He climbed onto Appa's back and settled in, getting a dirty look from Katara. "Chief Arnuk has sent a message to a village that his father had once known," Paku told them. "They will send someone to meet up with you once you have reached Omashu and begin your earthbending training with King Bumi. For now, head to General Fong's base so that they can give you an escort." "Understood," Sokka answered. As Appa took off, he heard Katara muttering something. "Is everything all right, Katara?" he asked. "Everything is fine, Sokka, just fine," she replied in an annoyed tone. He chose not to push it. If she wanted to tell him, she would. Location: FNS Royal Flame. Naruto watched as Azula gave her men a speech. It was short and to the point, driving home the points she felt they needed to hear. She was good at that. My brother and my uncle have disgraced the Fire Lord, and have brought shame on all of us, she said, walking amongst them. You might have mixed feelings about attacking members of the royal family. I understand. But I assure you, if you hesitate, I will not hesitate to bring you down. No one said a word. They didn't dare to. Dismissed. As her men left, the captain approached and gave a quick bow. Princess, I'm afraid the tides will not allow us to bring the ship into port before nightfall, he told her. She looked out at the sea from the prow. I'm sorry, Captain, but I do not know much about the tides, she said without once looking at him. Could you explain something to me? Of course, Your Highness. Do the tides command this ship? I'm afraid I don't understand. Even as he said the words, he felt a sense of dread turning in his stomach. You said the tides would not allow us to bring the ship in. Do the tides command this ship? She asked again. This time, the question came with a sharp warning. No, Princess, and if I were to have you thrown overboard, would the tides think twice about smashing you against the rocky shore? That dread morphed into a panic. As much as he didn't want to think that could happen, the princess was every inch the Fire Lord's daughter. No, Princess. Well then, maybe you should worry less about the tides, who've already made their mind about killing you, and worry about me, who is still mulling over. She told him. He bowed. I'll pull us in. Naruto stopped him before he went to the command deck. I know she told you to bring the ship in, but I want you to use your best judgment, he said, keeping his voice calm. The captain felt a little more at ease but stayed alert to the princess. Thank you, Lord Naruto. But right now, my best judgment is to obey Princess Azula, he replied. He did not want to be on the receiving end of her anger. He chuckled. I wouldn't worry. Azula won't have you thrown overboard because of this. The captain didn't believe him. I'll go talk to her. The captain nodded in thanks and went inside. Naruto walked up to Azula. How many times have I asked you to stop threatening the captain of the ship, Azula? He asked her. I lost count, she answered, half sarcastically. That got her a smack upside the head. Oh. What was that for? She demanded, rubbing her head. That was for being sarcastic when I was being serious. But you do it to me all the time. I'm your bodyguard, I'm allowed, he said lightly. Then he got serious. But back to the point, you told me that you would stop threatening captains after that incident involving that one captain's son and the bedroom. His pointed look had her blushing faintly. That happened one time and you still won't let it go, she accused. It was not like anything happened. With good reason, Azula. If you want to rule the Fire Nation, then you cannot threaten or punish everyone who displeases you. That will get you killed in the end, understand? She nodded. Good, now I'm going to let you off the hook this one time, but keep this up and I will enforce punishments, he said lightly. Azula grew nervous. What kind of punishments? Her voice didn't crack, at least she didn't think it. To those who knew Naruto in the Fire Nation, if he used the word punishment, what he really meant was that he was going to prank you and prank you hard. No one was safe from Naruto's punishments, not even Fire Lord Ozai, considering he was the first victim of Naruto's punishments. I'll just let your imagination try and figure that out, he said with an evil smirk. He walked away, leaving Azula with a sacred look on her face. Meanwhile, inside his head, the Kyuubi was laughing. You truly are evil, Gaki. I threatened her for a reason, Fox. If she keeps going like this, she's going to end up like her royal flaming asshole of a father, he told the Biju. I know that, and you're doing a decent job of guiding her. But even you have to admit that some of your methods are downright hilarious. Of course I do. That is why I do them. It's a treat to see the confident Fire Nation princess get flustered and angry, he stated with a quiet laugh. Location, aboard Appa. Sokka kept a lookout as they flew. He was the first to see their destination. There it is, he cried, pointing to a large fortress. Now knowing where to go, Aang flew Appa towards and into the fortress, landing on a terrace. They were greeted by someone instantly. Welcome, Avatar Aang. I'm General Fong, the general introduced himself while he and the men behind him bowed their heads. And welcome to all of you great heroes, Appa, Momo and the mighty Katara. Mighty Katara, I like that, Katara stated, crossing her arms. She certainly felt mightier since she really knew how to waterbend. The title gave her a certain sense of satisfaction and smugness. Fong looked around. Forgive me, but wasn't there another person with you? He asked, making Aang and Katara start to look around for Sokka. He was still in the saddle, having a conversation with Akela. You really need to stop falling asleep every time you get on Appa, he told the pup, who just yawned in reply. After he and Akela landed on the ground, he saw the general and the others. Sorry about that. Once Akela is out, he's hard to wake up. General Fong shook his head. That's not a problem, Paragon Sokka, he said shortly. He turned around and motioned them to follow. As they went into the main tower, Sokka was not quite sure, but he could have sworn Fong said that last part with distaste. Then again, how did he know what the tribesman was now? He certainly had not told anyone. Fong took them to the main hall. Avatar Aang, we were all amazed at the stories of how you single-handedly wiped out an entire fire navy at the North Pole, he said from behind his desk. I can't imagine what it feels like to handle devastating power. It's an awesome responsibility, he declared while stroking his bread, trying to look wise. Aang didn't like what he was implying. I think those stories are a little exaggerated. I never destroyed any of the ships, he began to say, but Fong cut him off. Avatar, you're ready to face the Fire Lord now. What? Shouted said airbender. No, I'm not. He was not even close to ready, Katara agreed. Aang still needs to master all 4 elements, she told Fong. Why? With the power he possesses, power enough to destroy hundreds of battleships in a matter of minutes, he can defeat the Fire Lord, he replied, coming to his feet. I told you, I never sunk any of those ships. This time Aang was stopped by Sokka, who put a hand on his shoulder. But sir, Aang can only do that when he's in the Avatar state, he told the general. You see, it's the special state where… Before Aang could even start his explanation, Fong interrupted him. I'm aware. Your eyes and tattoos glow, and you gain unbelievable power. He turned to the map beside him. Without you, we'd be slaughtered before we even reached their shores, but with you leading the way, as the ultimate weapon, we could cut a swath right through to the heart of the Fire Nation. He placed his finger on the location of his fortress, and drew it to the capital of the Fire Nation with a board stroke. When Sokka heard the words ultimate weapon, his eyes went flat, and he began to grow suspicious of the general. Akela also picked up on what the general had said and began to softly growl. Sokka looked briefly at the pup, shaking his head and silently telling him to stop. Akela did so, albeit reluctantly. Right, but I don't know how to get in or out of the Avatar state, much less what to do once I'm there, Aang explained uneasily. He omitted the fact that he felt scared about the Avatar state. So, it's decided then. The general turned away from the map and faced them. I'll help figure out how to get into the Avatar state, and then you'll face your destiny, he declared. Okay. Katara didn't like where this was going. She stood up and the others mimicked her actions. No, nothing's decided. We already have a plan. Aang's pursuing his destiny his way. Fong didn't seem too impressed with her crossed arms and daring expression. Well, while you take your time learning the elements, the war goes on, he replied. May I show you something? He came down from his desk and led them to a window. He pointed down to a small building. Wounded soldiers were going in or out of it. Most were injured somehow. That's the infirmary, and those soldiers are the lucky ones. They came back, he told them. Every day, the Fire Nation takes lives. People are dying, Aang. You could end it, now. Seeing the indecisiveness obviously etched onto the Avatar's face, he eased off somewhat. Think about it. He walked back to his desk and sat down, watching in silence as Aang and Katara left the room, leaving Sokka and Akela. Was there something you needed? He asked the tribesman. Sokka looked the man straight in the eye. Yeah, I have a question. How many of those men were injured because of sheer stupidity? He asked back. From what he heard come out of the general's mouth, he sounded like the kind of guy who would do that. Whatever do you mean, Paragon Sokka? The distaste was much more evident now that the two of them were alone. How do you know I was a paragon anyway? I never told anyone about that. Word travels, Paragon. This time, he all but spat the last word out. By now, everyone on this side of the world has probably heard that you are a paragon. So, what do you have against me, personally? Or do you dislike because of what I am? Fong's face grew hard and bitter. I've read my history. I know what your predecessors have done. This war will be won by the Avatar and by the Benders as well as the non-Benders who support him. It will not be won by upstart little brats who think they are better than the Avatar. Why don't you go home and let the Avatar, your sister, and the adults fight the war? Akela growled loudly and lunged for the general, only for Sokka to bark out, Akela, heel. He stopped, but still bared his fangs, small as they were, at the general before patting back to Sokka. Try to control your dog. We don't need a feral animal loose here, Fong told Sokka. Akela is a wolf, not a dog. And I like him feral. Sokka motioned Akela to follow him as he walked to the open doors. Just before he left, he turned back to face Fong. Let me ask you this question instead. How many men were injured and how many were killed because of your sheer stupidity when you went up against Naruto? He left the room with that question in the air. Location, FNS Royal Flame. Azula practiced the motions again and again. But no matter how many times she was able to generate lightning, she was still one hair out of place. Both Lo and Lee had left her, going down below. They said it was so she could have some peace. She took it to mean they were tired of her not getting it. It was frustrating, but she kept at it. When she finally stopped, she saw her bodyguard was still in the same spot as when she started. He was sitting in a meditative position and concentrating on his outstretched right hand. After a few seconds, what looked like blue chi to Azula began to swirl around his palm. It began to compress on itself as more and more began to form and swirl. Soon enough, floating a few inches above his palm, was a blue spinning orb. She saw Naruto's eyes focus on the orb and it began to spin even faster and form 4 white blades spinning around the outside of the orb. As she watched, Azula heard a low thrumming, like something was trying to cut the air itself. The orb continued to spin until it abruptly disappeared. Naruto sighed in slight frustration. Not there yet, but definitely making progress, he said to himself. He rose and looked at Azula. Is something the matter? It's nothing. I keep generating lightning, but no matter how many times I do it, I'm always just a hair out of place, she replied, sounding as frustrated as she felt. He raised an eyebrow questioningly. Are you telling me that in order for your lightning generation to be perfect, you must have perfect hair? He asked mischievously. Before Azula could respond, he continued. I'm just playing with you, Azula. You have made some good progress with lightning generation. Do you remember what happened the first time you successfully created a lightning bolt? She looked away. Enough, Naruto. I'm glad that I managed to spread my legs in time, but what I want to know was why that lightning bolt was that low in the first. I said enough. She bent a fireball at him, which he promptly dodged. You need to lighten up, Azula. You keep going like this, and you will burn out fast. You're already one of the best firebenders out there. No! I cannot just be one of the best. I must be the best firebender there is. I have to be perfect in OW. That last bit was uttered because Naruto had bonked her on the head. Stop right there, Azula. That is your royal flaming asshole of a father speaking, and I want to hear you, not him, speak, Naruto told her in a serious voice. Now what do you think of your lightning generation abilities? Azula thought it over for a minute, trying to separate what were her thoughts, and what were the thoughts her father drilled into her. I think that they're pretty decent, she finally answered. The fact that she was able to generate lightning at all was impressive. Naruto smiled warmly. There, you see. It is okay to be decent at something, Azula. Remember that no one is perfect. He looked at the setting sun. Let us head below decks. We're both tired and hungry. A meal and some sleep will do us good. Azula nodded in agreement and began to walk towards the stairs alongside Naruto. By the way, Naruto, what was that thing in your hand? It looked like it was made from blue chi, she asked him, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. It's just something I'm working on, that's all, he answered shortly. Once it's done, will you show me how it works? She was curious to see what would happen if he used it in combat. No, Azula. I only plan to use it when the situation calls for it. That was all he would talk about the subject. He wanted to keep what he was working close to the chest. The banging on the door woke Naruto up. Feeling glad he went to sleep in his clothes, he opened the door to see one of the firebenders in front of him. What is it, soldier? He asked. The firebender was a little nervous but kept his voice from cracking. Sir, it's Princess Azula. She had nightmare and now will not let anyone in to see her, not even Lady Lo or Lady Lee. She's tried to burn anyone who walks in, he rapidly explained. Naruto nodded. Go back to your post, soldier. I'll take care of this. The soldier saluted and left. He came out of his room and walked down the corridors to Azula's room. Both Lo and Lee were standing outside the door. Having nightmares, Lo said, but it was Lee who continued the sentence. For her to have them is disgraceful. Naruto threw them a glare that would have melted a blizzard created by 10 master waterbenders. You know damn well who gave her those nightmares. If anyone is disgraceful, it's him, he told them both with a growl. Curb your tongue. This time it was Lee who spoke first and Lo who finished. If you know what's good for you, he laughed. You know, I still don't understand why he assigned you two to teach her fire bending. You're not even benders, and neither are you, both said in unison. Yeah, but the difference between me and him is I fight the war his family started while he and the both of you sit on your asses in comfort. He waved them away. Now leave, you're not doing anything but being inconsiderate to her. You will not. They started to say but were silenced when they saw his eyes hardened. I said leave, he growled, his voice promising them a painful death if they didn't. They left rather quickly. He opened the door and walked through, closing it behind him. The candles that lights were off, but there was a small window that let in the full moon's light. The pale beam of the moon fell somewhat on the bed. Azula, he called out to the bed. Go away! The bed screamed. A fireball flew out from under the sheets, right at him. He ducked and let it fly over his head and hit the wall, dissipating harmlessly against the middle. Go away, I'm not a monster, it's alright, Azula. He stood at the end of the bed. It's Naruto. The edge of the covers lifted and Azula looked out at him, the light from the window showing the hopelessness and scared look on her face. And Naruto? She asked hesitantly. He nodded. It's me. She stared at him for a second and then leapt at him, burying her face in his chest as she held on to him, and cried. Naruto sat down on the bed with her, simply holding her and rubbing her back while she cried, whispering soothing sounds. Was it the same dream again? He asked her when she had stopped. She nodded. I was chained to a post and surrounded by people who kept looking at me with disgust and hatred in their eyes. They kept calling me a monster. The post was set on fire and I was burning, but I could still hear them calling me a monster. She buried her head into his cheek again, tears threatening to fall. You're not a monster, Azula, he told her. You have a side of you which is both kind and caring. You have only just begun to show it recently. Do you remember the orphan you met on the street? She nodded. It was 2 weeks before her father ordered her to hunt down her brother and uncle. She had been walking with Naruto in a procession of Imperial firebenders through the city to see a prototype of a new battleship that was being built. As they approached the docks, a small boy ran past Azula and grabbed her money pouch. The boy did not get far before he captured by the Imperial firebenders. As he was about to lose a hand for stealing, Azula stopped them. She walked over to the boy, knelt so the two of them were at eye level. She asked him why he was stealing. He told her that he was stealing so he could buy food for the other kids at the orphanage because the person who ran the orphanage kept all the food and only fed the orphans the bare minimum. The owner also made them sleep in infested beds and rat-chewed sheets. When they got sick, they were not treated unless they were dying. When the boy was done, Azula had a look of pure fury on her face. Looking up at Naruto and her guard, she told them that they were going to this orphanage. Looking back at the boy, she asked him if he could show them where it was. He agreed and showed them the way to the orphanage. What they saw horrified them. The so-called orphanage was a rundown building. When they walked in, they were disgusted at the conditions in which the orphans lived in. When the owner came to greet Azula, she asked him why the orphans were living like this. He told them that he was short of funds. The boy called him a liar, saying he kept a large amount of money in the orphanage. The owner hit the boy and threatened to whip him in front of Azula, Naruto, and the Imperial firebenders. Azula told the Imperial firebenders to hold the owner, and then told Naruto to go and look for the money. He came back after a few minutes, carrying a big truck full of Fire Nation money. He told Azula that it was only 1 out of 25. She then ordered the Imperial firebenders to throw the owner in prison. She then ordered Naruto to go down the docks and bring the workers who were building the prototype here. When they arrived, she told them to start fixing the building. The orphanage was going to be funded by the royal family, and the next time she would check the place, it will have better accommodations for the orphans, and it will have a better owner. She turned back to the boy, took back her pouch and opened it. She poured out about half of the money, gave it to him and told him to share with the other orphans. Those kids still think of you as their big sister. Do you think that makes you a monster? Naruto asked her. No, she answered, stopping her tears. Are you feeling better now? Yes. Naruto stood up, letting Azula stay on the bed. He turned to leave but was stopped when Azula grabbed his hand. Please stay, she said, scared at the thought of being alone. Naruto looked at her, and then nodded. He lay down on the bed with his back to the wall. Azula lay down next to him, placing her back to his chest and hold his arm like it was a lifeline. She was asleep in less than 5 seconds. She is a broken child, the QB stated. It was so obvious that it was almost painful to see. I know she is. She can fix herself, but she needs a friend to help her. Naruto silently replied as he held her, and she held him in return. Is that all you want to be, Naruto? Or is it something more? The fox wondered to himself. Despite everything that seemed to point to the opposite, his Jinchuriki had his own nightmares to deal with. Location: Earth Kingdom. Aang walked into Fong's office, his footsteps echoing through the silent and all but empty hall. General Fong? He called out quietly. Come in, Aang. Have you thought about our discussion? Fong asked, despite already knowing the answer. He knew what the Avatar's answer was going to be the minute he heard him come in. I'm in. I'll fight the Fire Lord, Aang said. After a brief discussion with the general, Aang returned to the group's quarters. Both Katara and Sokka looked up from their beds as he walked in and went to his bed. I told the general I'd help him, by going into the Avatar state, he told them. Aang, no. This not the right way, Katara argued. Sokka said nothing as he absently scratched behind Akela's ear. There's a right way to do this. And it is through practice, study, and discipline. She continued, the general does have a point. Sokka began to say, but before he could finish, Katara interrupted. That's something I'd expect to hear from you. You just want Aang to glow it up or something. She almost shouted at him. That's not what I was talking. He tried to protest, but she cut him off again. If you two meatheads want to throw away everything we have worked for, fine. Go ahead and glow it up, she said in a huff as she walked out of the room. Katara, I'm just being realistic. I don't have time to do this the right way, Aang tried to defend himself. It didn't sound convincing to him either. The room was silent for a few minutes until the sound of breaking wind disrupted it. Damn it, Akela. At least aim it the other way, Sokka told his wolf pup. Somehow, Akela looked smug. What began the next day would seem to anyone else as weirdness. To start off, Fong had Aang drink a specialty that was supposed to enhance a person's chi tenfold, and might also make Aang go into the Avatar state. The result of that idea was Aang in a sugar high that would have made little kids either join him, or watch in wonder. He was flying all around the place on an airball, while also talking at a fast pace. As this all went on, Sokka commented that Aang could talk the Fire Lord to death. Akela was trying to follow Aang with his eyes. When Aang finally crashed into one of the columns, Akela covered his eyes with his paws. Both Sokka and Katara were not quite sure if he was doing that because of Aang crashing or because he got dizzy from watching Aang fly all over the place. Sokka tried to scare Aang into the Avatar state by using Momo as a head. Not only did that fail, but Akela saw Momo and decided he was hungry. The result was Akela chasing both Sokka and Momo around the fortress, with Momo somehow managing to get stuck in Sokka's shirt. So Sokka had to stick his head out of the middle of the shirt, giving the appearance of a two-headed being, one head being human, the second head a flying lemur. The soldiers who were watching found it hilarious. The third attempt would have made any sane person check General Fong's head to see if there's actually a brain in there. He organized a ritual that had Aang wear clothing from all four nations, which, quite frankly, looked ridiculous. The shaman began to chant a lot of mumbo-jumbo, poured water and earth into a bowl, threw a torch in, used an air blower bellow, and then, just to top it all off, threw the stuff, let us call it mud, at Aang. The only thing they got out of that, Aang sneezing and splattering all the mud on Sokka, Katara, Fong and Akela. As they were about to leave, Akela shook himself in front of Fong, splattering him with more mud. To Sokka, the wolf pup was blaming the general for all this. Location, spa resort. Look at these magnificent shells, Iroh said as he emptied the bag onto the table of their small house. I'll enjoy these keepsakes for years to come. We don't need any more useless things now, Zuko told his uncle. You forget, we have to carry everything ourselves now. They then heard a voice that surprised them. Hello, brother. Uncle, Azula said from where she sat across the room. Naruto stood against the wall, close enough to move but with enough distance to let her take charge. Both Zuko and Iroh instantly went on their guard. What are you doing here? Zuko growled at his sister. In my country, we exchanged a pleasant hello before asking questions, Azula said lightly, fiddling with a seashell. Have you become so uncivilized so soon, Zuzu? She stood up and walked over with the seashell still in hand. Naruto followed by only a few steps. Don't call me that, Zuko yelled. He hated that nickname. She knew he hated that nickname. Iroh knew his niece wasn't here for a visit. To what do we owe this honor? He asked, some suspicion. Even though Naruto had said she changed, it was still a good idea to be careful. It must be a family trait. Both of you so quick to get to the point. She broke the seashell with her fingers, causing Iroh to scowl. I come with a message from home. Father changed his mind. Family is suddenly important to him. He has heard of plans to overthrow him, treacherous plots. Family are the only ones you can trust. She looked at her brother for a moment, then out the window. Father regrets your banishment. He wants you home. She looked back to see her brother's reaction. Zuko just stood, mentally double-checking to make sure he heard his sister correctly. Meanwhile, Naruto walked up to Azula, told her that he will be outside, and walked out the door. Did you hear what I just said? Azula demanded as her bodyguard left and Zuko looked out the window. You should happy. Excited. Grateful. I just gave you great news. I'm sure your brother simply needs a moment to, Iroh began. Don't interrupt, Uncle. She snapped at him. She walked up beside Zuko. I still haven't received a thank you. I'm not a massager. I didn't have to come all this way. Father regrets? He wants me back? Zuko asked, still not sure about it. Suddenly, his dream was within his grasp. It almost seemed to be too good to be true. I can see you need time to take this in. I'll come to call on you tomorrow. Good evening. As she made her way back to the ship, she saw Naruto leaning against a tree waiting for her. When she passed him, he got up and walked behind her. Why did you leave? She asked. Because if I didn't, I would have started laughing, Naruto said. Family is important to the royal flaming asshole. That's one of the better jokes I've heard you tell, Azula. Yeah, a joke. Azula said quietly, but Naruto was still able to hear her. Am I going about this the right way, Naruto? He shrugged. You're doing what your father would do, and I know that the royal flaming asshole doesn't think friends or family are important. The question is, do you consider them important? She thought it over for a few minutes. By the time they returned to the ship, she replied. I'm not sure. Naruto simply nodded. I understand. Maybe you just need to think on it. Azula nodded in agreement as they boarded the ship. That sounded like a good idea. Location: Earth Kingdom. Aang sighed in defeat as he watched Katara walk away. He turned back around to watch the sunset. As he did, he heard Sokka come up beside him. Are you going to convince me that this is a bad idea now? He asked, turning slightly to look at the tribesman. Sokka shook his head. I know it's a bad idea, and so do you. You just want to end this war so badly that you're ignoring this one crucial point. Aang lost his temper after hearing this. Don't give me that, Sokka. You were agreeing with the general said after I told you to what I had done. He yelled at him. Sokka simply waited for Aang to be done. While I did say that the general had a point, Katara cut me off before I could finish. What I was going to say that it's also too risky to try it because there is a downside to it. Aang grew confused. What do you mean a downside? Aang, you know how I constantly use my boomerang? The airbender nodded. While the upside is that it can hit someone from far away and always come back to me, the downside is that it can take too long to come back to me. If I throw my boomerang at someone and that was my only weapon, it could give someone the chance to kill me. Every weapon has a downside, and from what I've seen, the avatar state is a weapon. How is the avatar state a weapon? When you enter the avatar state, your emotions take over and you let rage rule your actions. No, I don't. He immediately protested. Yes, you do, Aang, and when that happens, everyone in your way could get hurt. Look, my dad taught me that in battle, rage must be tempered with discipline, and how am I supposed to do that? Aang demanded. He really wanted to know how. But he was tried and exhausted by everything that had happened today. His temper was a bit short. Do what you're supposed, learn and master the 4 elements, Sokka reminded him. He calmed down when he heard that. Do you think that will help me with the avatar state? Why else would all the previous avatars go through the exact same thing? The tribesman asked in return. Aang gave a small laugh at that. You're right, Sokka, he said before his face grew troubled. What about General Fong? Look, tomorrow morning, go tell the general that you want to continue on your journey. If he disagrees, I'll do something that'll prove my point. Are you sure? Sokka just gave him a small grin. Location: Spa Resort. We're going home, after 3 years. It's unbelievable, Zuko said as he packed. He had been excited ever since he fully realized what Azula had said earlier. But while his nephew kept moving around the house, Iroh looked out the window and thought. It is unbelievable, he agreed, albeit in a different way. I have never known my brother to regret anything. Did you listen to Azula? Father realized how important family is to him. He cares about me, Zuko protested, looking over at his uncle. He could believe that his sentiment was not shared. Iroh turned around to face his nephew. I care about you. And if Ozai wants you back, well, I think it may not be for the reasons you imagine, he told Zuko. Out of the 2 of them, he knew the Fire Lord better. You don't know how my father feels about me. You don't know anything, Zuko said, turning away from him. Zuko, Iroh said. I only meant that in our family, things are not always what they seem. Zuko whirled around, his anger exploding. I think you're exactly what you seem. You're a lazy, mistrustful, shallow old man who's always been jealous of his brother. He stomped away from his uncle, not seeing the downcast expression on his face. Location: Earth Kingdom. Aang stood in front of General Fong. Sokka had disappeared before he woke up and Katara wasn't anywhere nearby, so he was on his own. The thing is, I don't think we'll ever be able to trigger it on purpose, Aang explained. So, I guess that's it. Sure, I can't change your mind? Fong asked. If one were paying attention, one would have heard the slight pleading tone in his voice. Aang nodded, not hearing the tone. I'm sure. I can only reach the avatar state when I'm in genuine danger. The doors suddenly burst open as a soldier ran in. General Fong! He cried. What is it? The general asked as he rose from his desk. Look out the window into the courtyard, sir. Fong and Aang rushed over to the window. What they saw surprised them. A good majority of General Fong's army was fighting, but they were not fighting an army. No, they were fighting just one person, Sokka. Location, Spa Resort. Zuko walked down the staircase that was carved into the side of the mountain. He stopped for a second to look at the ship. All he could see was the promise that the ship silently held. He started to walk again when he heard his uncle's voice. Wait! Don't leave without me, it called out. Turning around, he saw Iroh coming down the stairs with a travel pack just like the one he had on his shoulder. Uncle, you changed your mind, he said, happy that he was coming. Family sticks together, right? Iroh asked, catching up to his nephew and placing a hand on his shoulder. When he felt that hand, he was reminded of a different time and a different hand on his shoulder. We're finally going home, he said as he turned back to look at the ship, that memory echoing in his mind. As he walked down the staircase, he failed to see Iroh looked at the ship with suspicion. They're coming, Naruto noted from where he stood on the ship next to Azula. Yes, I can see that, she said with a small hint of sarcasm. He ignored that remark and turned to the captain. Captain, have the Imperial Firebenders line up, he called out. Let's make them feel welcomed. Yes, Lord Naruto, the captain answered. He turned around and began giving orders. The ship and dock briefly became a bustle of activity as people began to move around. This won't go as smoothly as you think it will, Naruto told Azula. And what makes you think that? She asked with a raised eyebrow. He shrugged. It just will. She scoffed at the simplicity of his answer. You're paranoid. I'm your bodyguard. It's my job to be paranoid about stuff like this, he replied with a straight face. Will you relax? Nothing will happen, she assured him. Zuzu is desperate to go home and my uncle won't let him go alone. This will be easy. She wondered when her brother would figure out that he was trapped. If you say so, but if it happens, and Zuko goes for you, I will not interfere. That had caught her by surprise. Why? 2 simple reasons, he answered. Number 1, I know you can handle him. Number 2, I want to see how far Zuko has come along. Azula scoffed. Zuzu was pathetic at best with fire bending. She could still remember the day he tried to impress their grandfather and failed. I don't know why you want to see how far along he's come. We both know firebending isn't the only he knows. And we both know who taught him swordsmanship. He was very agile last time, and he knew how to hide himself. He did last longer than you did when we were playing hide and seek, she scowled. Don't remind me. That was one memory that she would always remember with annoyance. It had been one of the few times Zuko had beaten her at something. You're still embarrassed about the fact that you were tied up in a tree after only 5 minutes of the game? Naruto was genuinely surprised by that. He would have thought she had gotten over it by now. Azula would have responded had Zuko and Iroh had not appeared at the other end of the dock. As the two walked down the pier, Naruto noticed that Iroh kept looking at the Imperial Firebenders on each side of them. Ten says that this is about to get ugly, Naruto thought as he silently stepped back and leapt up to the roof of the command tower, sitting down and leaving Azula with 2 Imperial Firebenders behind her. No bet, the QB replied. Brother, uncle, welcome. Azula greeted them as she bowed, and they bowed in return. As he and Zuko bowed, Iroh noticed that the Imperial Firebenders had filed in behind them. I'm so glad you decided to come. Are we ready to depart, Your Highness? The captain asked, turning to face her. Set our course for home, Captain, Azula ordered. Home, Zuko said quietly to himself. It had been 3 years since he had seen it. You heard the princess. Raise the anchors. We're taking the prisoners home. The captain ordered as he, Zuko and Iroh walked up the gangplank, only to stop and freeze when he realized his mistake. As he froze, so did everyone else. And here we go, Naruto thought as Azula glared at the captain. Your Highness, the captain tried to explain, but it was too late. Both Zuko and Iroh had caught on. While Iroh quickly spun and dealt with the Imperial Firebenders, Zuko had thrown the captain into the water. You lied to me. He accused Azula with a look of fury. Like I've never done that before, Azula answered before turning her back and signaling the 2 Imperial Firebenders behind her to attack. They were quickly defeated by him. taking them down at the same time and landing on the deck of the ship at the same time. "Zuko, let's go!" his uncle called out as he fought the Imperial firebenders on the pier. But Zuko would not back down now. He simply bent his fire into the shape of 2 daggers, one in each hand, and began to attack Azula. "That's an interesting way to firebend in close combat," Naruto noted as he watched, his voice only loud enough for him and the Biju inside him to hear. "But it's also sloppy," the QB stated as he observed as well. "He's striking wildly and not focusing." The fox was right. Azula was bending no return fire. She simply ducked and weaved, avoiding the wild strikes her brother was throwing at her. When she deflected a strike, she turned it to her advantage by pushing him back. "You know, father blames uncle for the loss of the North Pole. And he considers you a miserable failure for not finding the Avatar," she taunted him. "Why would he want you back home, except to lock you up where you can no longer embarrass him? Good Kami, woman! Are you trying to make him madder?" The fox wondered out loud. "Is that a rhetorical question?" Naruto asked him. Zuko simply yelled in rage and began to attack Azula again. Their fight went around the ship, eventually going up the stairs on the deck. After a few moments of twisting, turning, and deflecting, she grabbed one of Zuko's hands in a hold and then bent a blue stream of fire at him. He stumbled back to avoid it but fell down the staircase. As his eyes refocused on his sister, he saw that she began to generate lightning. But before she could use it against him, Iroh intercepted the lightning by grabbing Azula's hand and redirecting it towards the mountainside. Taking advantage of her surprise, he twisted her hand, making her bend forward and kicked her in the chest, making her fall overboard. He helped his nephew get back up on his feet, and the two of them got off the ship. As they ran down the pier, they saw a shadow briefly fly over them. When they reached the staircase that led back up the mountain, they saw Naruto standing in front of them. But before they could even attack him, he took one step to the side, silently giving them an offer to keep going. They took that offer and raced past him. He walked back to the pier as Azula pulled herself out of the water. The sopping wet princess glared at her bodyguard. "And what do you have to say in your defense for not stopping them?" she growled at him. He thought it over for a few moments, and finally gave her a fox-like grin. "Told ya," he answered. "Location, Earth Kingdom. Will you hold still?" A soldier shouted as he tried to hit Sokka with his weapon, only to miss. "Why would I do that?" Sokka asked aloud before he dodged a stone ring that was bent at him by one of the earthbenders. He had been fighting against most of the army for a while now, and though it sounded odd, he felt that there was a kind of flow to the fight. It was like he could tell what they are going to do before they even did without even looking at them. He dodged a spear thrust from behind him even when he could not see the person who held the spear. Meanwhile, Aang was racing down the stairs outside of the tower, and had met up with Katara. "What's going on, Aang?" she asked, having already noticed the commotion. Akela was by her side. "All I know is that Sokka is in the middle of that fight," he hurriedly explained, pointing down to the fight. Fong, who had gotten there before Aang did, shoved his way into the middle of the fight and ordered his troops to halt. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Before anyone could answer, he continued. "Why did you attack my troops?" he demanded of Sokka, looking down at the tribesmen. "One of your soldiers decided to be funny and tried to trip me by earthbending. When I saw it coming and stepped out of the way, he got mad. He tried to attack me, and I retaliated. The next thing I know, I'm fighting about 3/4 of your army and proving a point to you," Sokka answered, making Fong even more furious. "What was the point you were trying to make?" the Earth Kingdom general asked through gritted teeth. "That even an army can be beaten by one person. I'm guessing that thought never even crossed your mind when you fought against Naruto. How many of your many were injured or killed before you finally decided to pull out?" Sokka asked in a serious voice. When he heard that question, Fong snapped. He did not see Sokka in front of him with his soldiers wounded all around him. He saw that spirit's damned blonde back on that battleground in front of the colony, looking at him with annoyance and irritation. "I won't tell you again. Leave." The words he heard that day echoed in his mind. "Hold him!" he screamed. A soldier tried to obey the general's order, but Sokka twisted out of his grasp and moved out of the way when Fong tried to hit him. The army formed a circle around the two as Katara and Aang tried to force their way to the front. When they were able to do so, they saw that the general was trying to hit Sokka, too angry to effectively use his bending, and her brother twisting away from him. Those moves look a little familiar, Katara thought as she watched her brother fight. She knew those stances from somewhere but could not place them. Meanwhile, Aang was trying to stop the fight. "Please, General, stop fighting," he cried as he tried to stop the two of them. Fong looked at the air nomad and then suddenly, Like he had calmed down in that single moment, he used his earthbending to sink Sokka into the ground up to his waist. "If you want me to stop, use the Avatar state," he ordered, pushing him to the side, and began to give Sokka a beating. Katara tried to stop the general but was held down by the soldiers. Akela tried to interfere but got stuck because his legs were encased in stone. They were helpless to stop the beating. They could only watch it happen. Sokka was beginning to look bad from the beating as Fong kept pummeling him. "I don't see glowing," the general told Aang, who was desperately trying to go into the Avatar state, but with no success. "You don't need to do this," begged Aang as he tried to hold the punch the general had drawn back. Fong scowled and freed his hand. "Apparently I do." Turning his attention back to Sokka, Fong punched him so hard that he spat out blood and slumped forward onto the ground. For Aang, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. As he saw Sokka slump down to the ground, he went into the Avatar state and turned to glare at General Fong. "It worked, it worked!" The general celebrated, seemingly oblivious to what he had just unleashed. But the celebrations did not last long as the general was thrown back by a slash of air, courtesy of a truly angry Aang. Why else would he be in the Avatar state? Aang then began float upward by bending a large tornado to support him. He looked down upon the fortress, like a god looking upon mortals. "Avatar Aang, can you hear me?" Fong shouted over the sound of the wind whipping past his ears. "Your friend is safe." It was tricked to trigger the Avatar state. He released Sokka from the ground and released Akela's legs from the stone. The soldiers also let go of Katara, who ran over to check on her brother. "And it worked!" he cried in triumph. Aang responded by suddenly slamming back down to the ground, causing a ripple of air and an upheaval of the earth to blow away the ring of soldiers and causing damage to the fortress itself. Before Aang could do any more, he was stopped by the one person he did not expect, Sokka. But there was something different about Sokka as well. Just as Aang's eyes and tattoo shined a bright white, Sokka's eyes and the symbols and the lines on the medallion, which somehow slipped out from the confines of his shirt, were shining as well. The only difference was that they were shining the darkest black one could ever see. "Enough," Sokka said in a voice that was overlaid with another voice. Aang went completely still when he heard the word, but his spirit was lifted out of his body. He felt a hand on his shoulder, and when he turned to see who it was Roku. "It's time you learned," the pervious avatar told him. They flew away on Roku's dragon, up to the clouds. As they flew through the clouds, Aang saw previous avatars were standing amongst them. He could barely make out the fact that their eyes were glowing. "The Avatar state is a defense mechanism, designed to empower you with all the skills and knowledge of all the past avatars," Roku explained. Aang then saw a vision of an Earth Kingdom avatar bending two large statues off the ground, her eyes momentarily glowing. "The glow is the combination of all your past lives, focusing their energy through your body." Aang saw two visions, one of a water tribe avatar bending up a tidal wave and an air nomad avatar bending a wind that was powerful enough to bend the surrounding trees. Both of their eyes had momentarily glowed. "In the avatar state, you are at most powerful, but you are also at your most vulnerable," the previous avatar warned the current one. "What do you mean?" Aang asked him, after seeing a vision of a Fire Nation avatar causing several volcanoes to erupt. "If you are killed in the avatar state, the reincarnation cycle will be broken," Roku told him, as he and the previous avatar stood before him in a line, going back farther than he could see. "And the avatar will cease to exist." One by one, each avatar faded away from the current avatar's eyes, ending with Roku. Fong carried him back to his body, flying back down to the fortress. But before he could re-enter his own body, he felt a presence nearby. "I see that Roku had forgotten to mention something important about the avatar state," an ethereal voice spoke. Aang turned around to see a cloaked person standing in front of him. The cloak itself was ever-changing. The fabric was made of both black and white, and the two colors kept moving around, never stopping at point. The hood was up, and no matter how hard you tried, you could never see the person's face. "What do you mean?" Aang asked cautiously. He was not sure how, but he somehow knew that this was a spirit. He forgot to mention that there is a group of people who have the power to cut off the link between you and the avatar state, the spirit explained, like it was nothing. "You've already met two of them, and one of those two commanded you to stop just now." "You mean Sokka?" he asked. The spirit nodded in acknowledgement at his question. "That's great. He can help me when I go fight the Fire Lord," he declared with a big grin. Suddenly, going into the avatar state did not seem like that big of a problem. The spirit gave a humorless laugh at those words. "Such naivety, these four people weren't given this power to help you. They were given the power so that they could stop you or possibly break the avatar cycle." Those words horrified him. They terrified him to his bones in a way he would not have thought possible. You can't do that. If the avatar cycle is broken, then the balance will be disrupted, and the world will be thrown into chaos. He automatically protested. And that's a bad thing? The spirit asked him. I'll tell you a secret, little avatar. It walked up to Aang and leaned down to whisper in his ear, even though it did not look like it had a mouth. The world will be around long after your precious cycle is broken. I should know. I was here before the cycle even came into existence. Before Aang could even reply, the spirit made shooing motion and said, Off you go now, little avatar. The next thing he knew, he was back in his own body. When he looked around and saw all the damage he had done, he had a look of sadness on his face. As Katara rushed over to comfort him and to give him a hug, he whispered, I'm sorry, Katara. I hope you'll have to see me like that again. Ha! Are you joking? That was perfect. They turned to see the general walking up to them with a slightly crazed look. We have the means to control you when you're like that. Aang threw the general a look. You're out of your mind, he accused. Fong ignored him. I'll guess we'll hammer out the details on the way to the Fire Nation. He was about to continue when Sokka, still covered in bruises, walked up to him and buried his fist in the general's stomach. While he bent over to grasp for breath, Sokka kneed him in the face, breaking his nose. When the general was reeling back from that, the tribesman grabbed the hair on the top of his head and slammed his face into the ground. That was for the beating, Sokka told him. He looked at all the soldiers. Anybody got a problem with that? They shook their heads very quickly. Akela decided to add insult to injury by walking over to the general's unconscious head and raised his rear leg. No one commented on the sound or smell that followed. Do you still an escort to Omashu? One of the soldiers asked, looking anywhere but his unconscious commander. Katara shared a quick look with Aang and Sokka. I think we're all set, she answered. As Appa carried them away from the fortress, Aang looked back at Sokka, who was being treated by Katara. You were right, Sokka. The only way for me to master the Avatar state is to master the 4 elements. He then remembered something. You said that if the general disagreed with what I was going to say, you were going to do something. What was it? Weren't you paying attention, Aang? I did do something, Sokka replied as he tried to keep still for his sister. You mean the fight? He asked, receiving a nod in return. But it started before I went to speak with General Fong. How did the fight help? I knew what the general was going to say long before you went to speak with him, Aang, he said as Katara finished up. What do you mean? Sokka took a breath as he began to explain. After our first meeting with General Fong, I did a little snooping around and talked to the soldiers. It turns out that the general is a bit of a glory hound. After I heard him use the words ultimate weapon, I knew that he was going to get you to agree to unlock the Avatar state by any means necessary. That still doesn't explain the fight, the air nomad pointed out. I was getting there, Aang. I had also found that at the same time we arrived at Omashu, General Fong had launched an attack against a new Fire Nation colony that was still being constructed. It had no defenses except for one person. It was Naruto, wasn't it? Katara asked. She did not know why, but that was the first name that came to her. Sokka nodded. From what I could find out, he apparently told the general to leave, and if he did not, they would have to fight him. General Fong didn't know who he was at that time, so he ordered the army to attack. Both Aang and Katara were silent, until Katara finally asked the question. How bad was it? Sokka's face turned grim. Would you say that the army at the fortress was fairly big? The two of them nodded. According to the soldiers I talked to, the army is about 1/10 of its original size. You mean? Katara asked, completely shocked. You mean that one person killed that many people? Sokka nodded. After he killed all those people, he stopped the battle and introduced himself to the general. After he had done that, he told General Fong to again leave. This time he did. And after that, he has a hatred with anything that is associated with Naruto, which included me, unfortunately. That's all interesting. But what does that have to do with the fight? Aang demanded. I'm getting there, Aang, he replied. After we had our conversation, I went to talk to some of the soldiers that thought the general's plan wouldn't work. After a while, we came up with a plan. Some of the soldiers would start a fight with me in the courtyard for a phony reason. As the fight progressed, we would get louder and louder with the fighting and the insults until we had attracted enough soldiers to make it an actual fight. Once that happened, we would simply wait until General Fong showed up with you in tow, Aang. After I made those comments about Naruto, he flew into a rage, and we all know what happened after that. Katara and Aang just looked at Sokka as he scratched behind Akela's ear. So, you were expecting that beating he gave you? Aang asked. Yes, once you saw that I was being beaten half to death, I knew you would be enraged and go into the Avatar state, thus proving my point about the Avatar state being a weapon, Sokka answered. What he had not expected was for the beating to be so vicious. He had underestimated Fong's hatred for the Paragons. Aang and Katara did not say anything as they thought over what Sokka had told them. Not just because of what he told them, but also because of what happened when Aang was in the Avatar state. To them, how Sokka was able to stop Aang completely, with just one word, scared them. Location, Spa Resort. Naruto watched as Azula showed the crowd the wanted poster for Iroh and Zuko. As the crowd dispersed, he walked up to her side. What are you thinking about? He quietly asked. I'm not thinking about anything, I'm just annoyed, she snapped, trying to avoid looking at him. You're annoyed with me, aren't you? He asked the obvious question. She glared at him. What were you thinking, letting them get away? I was thinking that if I let them get away, it would give you more time. Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? She asked, not sure of what he meant. If Zuko and Iroh are on the run, you would have to chase them. It would give you more time to find your answer. What are you talking about when you say answer like that? Your answer to whether or not family and friends are important to you, the blonde explained further. For some reason, she grew troubled. I don't have an answer. I didn't expect you to have one right away. She turned back to the ship. I'm going to get some sleep. Alright, sleep well. He'd stay and make sure the crew was in order. Azula walked up the gangplank, still trying to figure out what her answer was. Somehow, she thought to herself, I think I'll be dealing with this question for a while. Chapter 3, Omashu and Painful Reunions. Location, Omashu. Katara, Aang and Sokka stared at what was in front of them, almost hoping that it was a dream. The city of Omashu stood in front of them, only now there was a Fire Nation banner flying over the city gates. There was a small smoke protruding from the upper level, indicating a presence of a new factory that the Fire Nation colonists must have built. I can't believe it, Aang said as he looked at the city. He looked at the siblings. I know the war has spread far, but Omashu seemed to be untouchable. Up until now it was, Sokka stated, crossing his arms and looking at the city. Now Ba Sing Se is the only great Earth Kingdom stronghold left. If he thought about it, it came across as more than a little troubling. This is horrible, Katara said as she walked up beside Aang. But we have to move on. If the city was occupied, there was no chance of them being able to find Bumi. No, Aang replied defiantly. I'm going in to find Bumi. Aang, stop, Sokka told him. We don't even know if Bumi is. What? Aang interrupted him, suddenly angry. If he's what? Alive, he bluntly stated. Aang was outraged and Katara flashed him a dirty look. He ignored both. You'll have to face the facts. Sooner or later you're going to lose someone. He looked at his sister. We should know. Katara ignored her brother. I know you had your heart set on Bumi, she told Aang. But there are other people who can teach you earthbending. This isn't about finding a teacher, he said stubbornly. This is about finding my friend. He wasn't going to go until he knew that Bumi was alive. Alright, then how do we get in? Sokka asked. Akela stiffened up as he sniffed the air. He turned around and growled, showing fangs. What is it, Akela? The tribesman asked, turning to see what it was. Hey, the group with the white, six-legged buffalo thingy. We're coming up behind you. A voice called out. A boy riding a dog came up the slope. How are you doing? The name's Kiba Inuzuka and this here is Akamaru, he introduced himself and the dog, who barked a greeting. Must you do that, Kiba? You'll scare people if you keep that up, another boy said as he joined Kiba. Oh, relax, Shino. Their dogs smelled us out before we showed our faces, Kiba replied. Akela's growl got louder. Hey! Akela is not a dog, he's a wolf. Sokka shouted at the two. Kiba looked a little embarrassed. Sorry about that, he apologized. I'm still learning, so your wolf smelled like a dog to me. No hard feelings, right? The last part was directed to Akela, who simply flicked his tail once. To Sokka, that meant Akela was thinking it over. Shino turned to face the slope. Are you coming, Hinata? He called. I'll be right there. I'm not as fast as you guys, the girl said as she came up the slope. Behind her was a woman who looked like she was in charge. You should really stop charging off like that, Kiba, she said. That's going to get you into trouble one of these days. Understood, Kurenai-sensei, he answered, respectful. Meanwhile, Sokka had his boomerang out and ready to use. Okay, who are you people? He demanded. The woman who they now knew as Kurenai looked at them as if they had just appeared. I apologize, my name is Kurenai Yuhi and I'm here to protect your group. These are my students, Kiba Inuzuka and Akamaru. She pointed to the first boy and the dog, Shino Aburaim. She pointed to the second boy, and Hinata Hyuga. She finished by pointing to the girl. Sokka took a good long look at the people in front of him. Kurenai had what appeared to be some sort of shirt made from mesh with only one sleeve. The shirt was covered over with bandages with a pattern that seemed to resemble a flower stem of some kind with thorns. Though Sokka was smart enough to not gaze too long at the older woman's upper thighs, he noticed them covered in bandages. Her hair was long and black, but what the most remarkable thing about her were her eyes. They were red, but not Fire Nation red. Kiba wore black pants and a black jacket that looked like leather to the tribesman. He had brown shaggy hair, pronounced canine teeth, and had what looked to be red tribal tattoos on his cheeks that almost looked like fangs. Akamaru was, in a word, big. His fur was white while his ears had dark brown patches. Currently both he and Akela were having a canine version of a staring contest. Shino just looked odd. He wore a dark jacket with a high collar that was upturned, blocking the bottom half of his face. He wore another jacket over the first that was dark green in color, and had the hood up, covering the top of his head. He wore what appeared to be protective eyewear, and had a satchel on his back. Sokka could have also sworn that he heard the sounds of bugs on Shino. By contrast, Hinata's appearance was certainly an eye-opener to those onlookers who did not bother to gaze too long at her. She wore a jacket that was lavender and cream, had long sleeves and appeared to be baggy. She also wore navy blue pants. She wore her blue hair long and her eyes were very surprising. They were white with a tinge of lavender and had no pupils. Despite the different clothes they were wearing, they all had one thing in common. They wore a headband. Kurenai, Shino, and Kiba had it on their forehead, while Hinata wore hers around her neck, that had a strange symbol on it which almost looked like a leaf. So we know who you are. Now what are you doing here? Were you following us? Sokka asked, ignoring Katara's low whisper of Sokka. We were hired to protect you three, Kurenai explained. Who hired you? I believe that it was a man called Arnuk. He is the chieftain of the Northern Water Tribe on this side of the planet. She pulled out a scroll, which had the contents of their mission inscribed inside, and handed it to him. Katara had finally had enough and explained, I'm sorry about my brother, he gets paranoid around strangers. Sometimes she wished her brother would just relax a little. Shino shook his head. It is perfectly logical to be suspicious of people who you do not know claim that they are here to protect you. Your brother has nothing to apologize for. Alright then, I assume that you overheard our conversation? Sokka asked Kurenai after he read the scroll and gave it back. She nodded. You plan to go into the city and rescue someone, right? Right, he answered. Now the question is, how do we get inside? My team will be able to get in easily enough. But I don't know if we can get you in the same way. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of that, he chimed in. Alright, we'll meet up inside with the resistance, Sokka decided. Sokka, how do you there's a resistance? He was clearly confused by what the tribesman said. Yeah, how do you know? Katara repeated the question with a slightly snotty tone. He looked at them both with a deadpan expression. It's a big Earth Kingdom city that's completely occupied by Fire Nation troops. There's going to be a resistance in there, it's just a matter of finding them. Okay, no, we're going to find Bumi, Aang replied, almost shouting at him. He sighed in annoyance and exasperation. Alright, fine. But if we can't find him right away, then we meet up with the resistance. He turned back to Kurenai. Are you okay with this? She nodded. That's fine. You should search for your friend during the night, she suggested. That way, they wouldn't be so easily found out. Okay, we'll look for Bumi until dawn, and then we meet up with the resistance. He looked around. Sound good to everyone? They all agreed. It might be better to leave your dog with Appa and Akela, he told Kiba. Why should I do that? Kiba answered, narrowing his eyes. He went everywhere with Akamaru. He wasn't going to leave him behind for no reasons, because Earth Kingdom cities don't have dogs that big. He'll be an eyesore. Kiba thought it over. Since they were a foreign land, it was best to play it safe and listen to the natives. Good point. He turned to Akamaru, who had broken eye contact with Akela, to look at him. Akamaru, I need you to stay these two for now. He pointed to Akela and Appa, who was having one of his ears scratched by Hinata, and loving every minute of it. Can you do that for me? Akamaru nodded and then turned back to Akela, to resume their contest. Aang, Katara and Sokka climbed onto Appa's back with Momo, Akela and Akamaru in tow. We're off, Sokka said as Aang yip-yipped Appa into flying. As they flew below the bridge that led into Omashu, Sokka looked at Aang. So how are we getting inside? He asked as he and Katara threw on cloaks. They literally had to walk through the front gate last time, and he doubted they could do that now. I know a secret passage, Aang answered as they landed in front of a ledge that had a big metal pipe sticking out of the mountain. He leapt off Appa onto the top of the pipe, recognizing it for the sewer grate he remembered. A secret passage? Why didn't we just use this last time? Sokka demanded as the air nomad tried to open the sewer grate. He almost gets swept away by green sludge-like water when the grate opened, making Appa fly away with Akela and Akamaru, with Momo was sitting on Katara's shoulder. Does that answer your question? Aang asked before hopping into the pipe. Sokka stepped in and almost hurled from the smell. Taking a breath and pinching his nose, he walked forward into the pipe. As they trekked through the water, which rapidly became steeper, both Aang and Katara tried to make sure they weren't swept down the pipe. Aang used his staff to bend the air in front of him to make a path while Katara bent the water to keep the path stable. Sokka caught the downside as he had to deal with the water hitting him in the face repeatedly by the water Katara bent. However, he could tell that his sister was doing it on purpose. When they finally got inside the city, it was already night. Aang had blasted a manhole cover to loosen it, and then opened it slightly to look around. When he didn't see anyone, he leapt out of the hole and was quickly followed by Katara. That wasn't as bad as I thought, she commented. They suddenly heard a moaning sound coming from the manhole. A green blob in the somewhat shape of a person climbed out and staggered towards them. Quickly getting over their shock after realizing who it was, Katara noticed some water in a nearby barrel. She bent the water inside the barrel to hit the thing. The result was the water washing the green muck off the person to reveal a very wet Sokka. Aang quickly followed up by bending air to dry him off. Sokka stood there quietly for a moment before realizing there were little purple octopus-like creatures on him. Screaming hysterically, he tried to pull the two on his cheeks off with no success. They won't let go. Help! He screamed before being tackled to a nearby wall by Aang. Stop making so much noise, the airbender told him. It's just a purple pentapus. While Sokka whimpered a little and cringed, he reached for the pentapus on the tribesman's left cheek and gave it a scratch on the head. Giving an eye smile, it lifted its legs from Sokka's face and came off easily, leaving only red marks where the suction cups were. As he rubbed his left cheek, Sokka tried the same method on the one on his right cheek. It met with the same results. As they got the third and final one off, the group heard someone call out, "Hey!" Looking to where the voice was coming from, they saw 3 guards coming their way. Both Katara and Sokka quickly stood in front of Aang while he made a quick hat. "What are you kids doing out past curfew?" the lead guard demanded. "Sorry, we were just on our way home," Katara explained before they start to walk away. "Wait," the guard said as he noticed the red markings on Sokka's neck. "What's the matter with him?" Katara took a quick look at Sokka's neck and came up with a lie. "He has pentapox, sir," she hurriedly explained as she turned Sokka around to face the guard. The guard walked up to Sokka and reached out to touch him. It's highly contagious." Taking his cue from his sister, Sokka put on a miserable face and began to moan. It's so awful, I'm dying," he told the 3 guards as he lurched towards them. "And deadly," Katara finished. "Hey, I think I've heard of pentapox," said the lead guard as he backed away from Sokka before turning his head to face another of the guards. "Didn't your cousin Chang die of it? We better go wash our hands and burn our clothes," the other guard stated before they turned around and ran away while Sokka threw in a few coughs for good measure. When the guards were gone, Sokka turned around to see Aang scratching a pentapus on his hand. "Thank you, sewer friend," he said. Location: FNS Royal Flame. The crew and Imperial firebenders had disembarked and had also set up camp for the night. A few of the Imperial firebenders were on the deck, bowing in front of palanquin that held the Fire Nation princess. On each side of the palanquin stood the twins, Lo and Li. "When tracking your brother and uncle, traveling with the royal procession may no longer be an option," Lo told the princess. "May no longer be wise," Li continued. "If you wish to keep the element of surprise, finish the 2 in perfect synchronization." "You're right. The royal procession is dead weight. If I want to catch my prey, I must agile, nimble." Azula nodded in agreement. She turned towards Naruto, standing beside her. "I need a small elite team. It's time to visit some old friends. What do you think, Naruto?" "It sounds like an idea, plus it'll help you with your answer," Naruto said from where he sat on the roof of the palanquin. If she had people she considered friends around, she would probably be able to find her answer quicker. She silently nodded. "Then we leave tomorrow, at sunrise." Naruto leapt off the roof and onto the deck. "I'll go notify the captain. We'll send the ship home in the morning. We'll only take a squad with us when we leave." He started to leave but stopped. "I just have one thing to ask you too," he told the twins. "Yes," Li asked and Lo continued. "What is it? Do you have to take turns speaking the same sentence?" He held up a hand, stopping them from speaking. "You know what? Forget it. Odds are you'll just give me an answer the same way. He left the ship to go talk to the captain. The nerve of that boy, said Lo, but Lee continued. For him to insult us like that. Neither of them noticed the small grin that Azula had on her face. Location, Omashu. The group moved up to the next level of the city, and quickly hid behind a lumber pile to avoid a patrol. Let's find Bumi and get out of here, Katara said. Where would they be keeping him? Sokka asked Aang. Aang gave it some quick thought. Somewhere he can't earthbend. Somewhere made of metal, he finally said. After looking out at the city to figure out what place would be able to have those conditions to hold Bumi, they quickly moved on. Meanwhile, on the next level down, there was a guard procession that was guarding a family, a mother with her toddler son as well as her teenage daughter. There really is no fathoming the depths of my hatred of this place, the teenager said in a bored tone, scowling slightly. My, your father was appointed governor. We're like royalty here, her mother told her. Be happy and enjoy it. I thought my life was boring in the Fire Nation, but this place is unbearably bleak, Mai replied. Nothing ever happens. As Aang and the others tried to make their way across the level, they saw two big boulders coming down one of the ramps fast. Turning to see what on the lower level, he saw the family and the guard procession. Thinking that they would be crushed by the boulders, he used his staff to airbend the boulders out of the way. However, it caused a great deal of noise and dust, alerting the guard procession. The resistance! Mai's mother cried out, pointing to Aang. Mai moved quickly. She flung out her arms, releasing a good number of small arrows at Aang, who dodged by jumping onto the lumber pile behind him. Touching the pile only once, he then leapt to the side and began to run away along with Katara and Sokka while Momo flew away. As the two guards climbed up the ladder and onto the next level, they began to chase after the group. Katara quickly used her water whip to swat them back down to the lower level. As they fell, Mai climbed up the ladder and attacked Katara. She fired more projectiles at the waterbender, but they were blocked when she bent water into a shield of ice and then ran away with Mai in pursuit. As she chased them across the level, Aang decided to stall to her. Using his staff, he bent the air to cause a nearby scaffolding to collapse in front of Mai. Stopping quickly to avoid being crushed, she threw a double-bladed knife that ricocheted off the wall and towards Aang. Sensing danger, he turned and rapidly spun his staff, causing the knife to hit the staff. Mai quickly launched another round of projectiles. But before they could even reach their target, the platform where the group stood suddenly dropped down, taking them with it. As it fell, another platform took its place, like they were never even there. Mai just gave a bored sigh and headed back to her family. Meanwhile, the group had landed in a tunnel. As they looked to see where they were, they noticed that they were surrounded by Earth Kingdom soldiers. After staying silent for about a minute, Sokka looked at both Aang and Katara. And the two of you thought there wasn't going to be a resistance, he told them. Aang looked sheepish while Katara threw him a dirty look. Location: Fire Nation Circus. So, Ty Lee is in there somewhere, Azula said as she looked at the circus being set up, as Naruto joined her a moment later. The circus grounds looked busy as the performers and staff were setting up the performance tents, while the animal handlers gave instructions to their employees on where they need to bring the cages. Naruto noticed a group of cooks giving the rest of the performers and animal trainers their meal, while Azula continued to look for the tent where their first recruit would stay. Yes, although they're going to be moving soon, Naruto noted. No one paid attention to the two of them. They were all too busy going about their business. But he can hear the loud commotion coming from the animal trainer who spotted the animal handler placing the cage in the wrong location. Alright then, I'll go in and look around for her. She began to walk off, only to be stopped by Naruto calling her name. What is it? I want you to try two things when you're talking to Ty Lee. The first is don't strong-arm her into joining us, he told her. This was something he was confident that if she did what he told her, getting Ty Lee to come with them will be much easier. What's the second thing? He smiled. Try asking her to help you. Why would I try and do that? She huffed. If she wanted Ty Lee to come with them, she would come with them. I'm not ordering you to ask her. I just want you to try, that's all. Fine. She walked into the circus ground with Naruto just behind her. When they finally spotted Ty Lee, he hung back to see how Azula would do. Ty Lee, could that possibly be you? She called out to her friend. Azula! Chirped the girl who was currently doing a handstand on a finger per hand. After getting her feet on the ground and bowing, she leapt and ran over, giving the Fire Nation princess a hug. It's so good to see you, she said with excitement. Please don't let me interrupt whatever it is you're doing, Azula told her. She immediately flipped backwards into a position where she was sitting on her elbows with her feet in the air in front of her. Tell me, what is the daughter of a nobleman doing here? Certainly our parents did not send us to the Royal Fire Academy for girls to end up in places like this, she asked Ty Lee as she watched a couple of the circus workers struggle with a platypus bear only for said platypus bear to lay an egg. Oh great! Another egg, muttered the animal handler in charge of the platypus bear as he looked at the new egg. Had that been any other time, she probably would have found that amusing. I have a proposition for you, Ty Lee. I'm hunting a traitor. You remember my old fuddy-duddy uncle, don't you? Oh yeah, he was so funny. Ty Lee answered with a giggle. When she thought of Iroh, she was always tempted to laugh. I would be honored if you joined me on my mission. She flinched a little when she heard those words. Oh. I would love to. She flipped herself back onto her feet. But the truth is I'm really happy here. I mean my aura has never been pinker. Ty Lee, please, Azula said, almost pleadingly. She grew curious. What's the matter, Azula? It wasn't like her to speak like that to anyone. She always seemed to look confident in what she did. She looked down at the ground, suddenly embarrassed by what was going through her head. There's a question that I'm dealing with and I don't know the answer to it. I think that if I have you by my side, I can figure it out. Ty Lee walked to the princess, taking her hand and gently holding it. Are you still having the nightmares? She asked quietly. Azula brought her face back up and Ty Lee didn't see the confident princess of the Fire Nation. She saw the terrified little girl who would run to her room every time she slept over after having the nightmare, so she wouldn't be alone. Yes, she whispered. Ty Lee gave her a quick hug. Okay then, I'll join you but after the show tonight. Thank you. She was relieved by that answer. That was one down, one more to go. By the way, where's that cutie you have been hanging out with? Ty Lee asked as she looked around. She didn't see who she was looking for. Cutie? Asked Azula, confused by her words. Oh, you know. Your bodyguard, she clarified with a knowing grin. The one who you have a small crew. Ty Lee's mouth was quickly covered by Azula's hand. You promised not to talk about that. She gritted her teeth in frustration. That was a little too close. You can come out now, Naruto, she called out. He walked out into plain sight. Hey cutie! Greeted Ty Lee. Are you becoming one of my fangirls, Ty Lee? He asked her amusingly. A lot of them call me cutie for some weird reason. She winced. No. Please remember that I was there last year when the great chase occurred. The three of them shuddered at the memory. Last year, Naruto had taken time in the morning to train with the domestic army, making sure that they can hold their own against an attack while they were at a disadvantage. One day, a fangirl had been watching him in secret as he trained with the soldiers. Apparently, the combination of him having taken his shirt off as he trained and the fact that he was sweating had triggered something within his secret admirer. 5 minutes later, Naruto was running for his life as the one fangirl gradually became a horde of them. The great chase lasted most of the day and destroyed quite a bit of the industry area and docks, including the buildings where Naruto tried to hide, but without any success, as the fangirls would destroy his hiding spots, forcing him to move constantly throughout the town. When Iroh had heard about the level of destruction, he said that if he had that kind of destructive power when he was invading Ba Sing Se, he would have conquered the city in a day. Somehow, what he said managed to find its way to his brother, and for quite some time afterwards, both Ozai and his generals were taking the comment seriously. What I don't understand is why they come after me. I'm no one special and I'm certainly not that handsome. Naruto wondered aloud, making both Azula and Ty Lee stare at him in silent disbelief. He still doesn't get it? They silently asked themselves. Sometimes this Gaki's innocence astounds me, the Kyuubi thought silently. It was quite funny to watch most of the time. But it was still astounding all the same. Anyway, are you coming with us, Ty Lee? Naruto asked the acrobat. She nodded. Yep, but only after the show tonight. Alright then, we'll be waiting, Azula told her. As she and Naruto walked away, she stopped. You know what? I think I'll catch your show tonight, she said, looking back. Ty Lee flinched and lost grip of the leg she was holding. She quickly grabbed her leg again and said, yeah, sure, of course. While she tried to remain cheerful, she was inwardly praying that all would go well that night. Naruto noticed the way she said it and nudged Azula, who got the silent point. I promise not to do anything stupid or dangerous during the show, she told Ty Lee. She might have once, but not anymore. Okay. Ty Lee replied, still a little nervous. Location, Omashu. The group stood in front of the leader of the resistance with Team Kurenai besides them. As it turned out, they had found the resistance almost right after they got into the city. After telling the resistance who they were and what their mission was, they kept an eye out for Aang, Sokka and Katara, letting the resistance know to bring them in. So is King Bumi with you guys? Is he leading the resistance? Aang asked with hope in his voice. Of course not, barked the leader of the resistance, angry at the Avatar's words. The day of the invasion, we were prepared to defend our city, to fight for our lives and for our freedom. But before we even had a chance, King Bumi surrendered. The group stood silent until Sokka said what actually happened that day. It was always a good idea to know the details of something. It helped form a more coherent picture. The leader began to explain. It was a week after your group had left Omashu. We had gotten word that a large force of Fire Nation troops were coming towards the city. As we prepared for battle, King Bumi and I took a walk through the courtyard when HH took a breath to steady himself. When he appeared, his voice growled those last 3 words. Flashback. My king, we're ready to defend ourselves, one of the soldiers said as Bumi inspected the troops in the courtyard. Bumi simply nodded at the soldier and continued the inspection. As the inspection ended, they heard someone from atop the wall yell out, "Somebody, stop him!" Looking up at the soldier who spoke, they only saw a brief shadow against the sun before someone landed in the courtyard and in front of Bumi. The person stood up from his crouched position. King Bumi, I presume? He asked. Yes, Bumi replied, keeping his expression neutral. I am the paragon of the Fire Nation, and I would like to request something of you. He became curious of those words. Oh? And what's that? Your surrender. The minute those words left his mouth, he was surrounded by both weapons and big rocks held by earthbenders. What say you? He continued, looking like he didn't care about being in danger. The soldiers surrounding him looked like they were about to attack him. Why should I surrender? Bumi asked, stopping the soldiers from attacking. Let's cut to the chase, King Bumi. You know who I am and what I can do. I'm giving you the chance to spare your men's lives and to avoid bloodshed, he explained patiently. When he heard that, the king of Omashu started to cackle madly. Well, when you put it like that, youngster, I really can't say anything in return. Fine, I surrender. Thank you, the paragon said, sounding very relieved. Now all I have to do is to tell the leading general that. Stand down, everyone, Bumi told his troops. They did so, albeit with great reluctance. Why do you need to tell your general that I surrendered? Because I already told him that you did, so he's not bringing an army to Omashu, but he's still skeptical. Bumi cackled madly at that. And flashback. What happened after that? Katara asked. The invasion force turned out to be just construction workers and colonists. They wasted no time in settling in and taking over our city. The leader shook his head. It doesn't matter now. Fighting the Fire Nation is the only path to freedom. And freedom is worth dying for. Actually, there's another path to freedom, Aang announced. You could leave Omashu. You're directing all your energy to fight the Fire Nation, but you're outnumbered. You can't win. Now's the time to retreat and live to fight another day. He didn't know why they didn't do that in the first place. You don't understand. They've taken our home and we have to fight them at any cost. The leader told them. When he said that, Kurenai's team had a look of slight disgust on their faces. I don't know, young. Living to fight another day is starting to sound pretty good to me, the soldier next to him said. Yeah, I'm with the kid, another soldier chimed in. The leader looked at the people in the camp. They were all talking about leaving and what a good idea it sounded. Fine, but there's thousands of citizens who need to leave, he conceded. How are we going to get them all out? He didn't see a way out without heavy fighting. Suckers! Sokka suddenly exclaimed. Everyone looked at him with a question in their heads, trying to figure out what he had just said. Sokka, could you try that again? Hinata asked. He had a big grin. You're all about to come down with a nasty case of pentapox, he told them. After explaining his plan to the group, while avoiding Katara's sarcastic remarks and dirty looks, Sokka ordered everyone in the resistance to gather up enough purple pentapus. Once they gathered a good amount, they started applying them onto their skin and pulling them off, leaving the red marks. Team Kurenai had gone on ahead to make sure the citizens could arrive in the designated area safely. Soon enough, everyone was out in the open sunlight and looked like they had been hit with a bad case of the pentapox. Sokka looked at his handiwork. The marks make you look sick, but you need to act sick too, he told them. You've got to sell it. Conveniently enough, an old man with a cane and peg leg walked through the crowd while groaning. Now that's what I'm talking about, the tribesman stated, pointing at the old man. Years of practice, the old man said, tapping his peg leg with his cane. Okay everyone, into sick formation, Sokka ordered. As they walked away, Aang began to go somewhere else. Aang, what are you doing? Aren't you coming with us? Katara asked. No. I'm not leaving until I find Bumi, he told her. He grabbed Momo, who had leapt onto his shoulder, and put him back the ground. Sorry, Momo, I'll feed you later, he said to the lemur. And with that, he leapt away to look for his friend. As Katara joined the citizens, Sokka joined her. He went off to look for Bumi, didn't he? He asked. What's it to you? She shot back. He just shook his head and rolled his eyes before moving forward. The Earth Kingdom citizens slowly approached the front gates, freaking out the guards in the process. Some were really getting into the act by foaming at the mouth or collapsing onto the ground. Finally, one of the guards yelled out, "Plague! Plague!" before falling back while another guard banged out an alarm. Meanwhile, at the governor's mansion, on one of the balconies, the governor as well as his wife, son and Mai stood there watching the confusion. What is going on down there? The governor asked. I saw some kids yesterday who were sick with pentapox, a nearby guard explained. It must have spread, pentapox. I'm pretty sure I've heard of that, he mused. Oh, this is terrible. His wife exclaimed in horror. What should we do? The guard asked. Drive them out of the city, but don't touch them. We have to rid the city of this disease, the governor ordered. The guard bowed and left to do his job. Fire flakes, Dad? Mai asked, holding the bowl out. The governor simply gave her a look out of the corner of his eye. Oh, how awful, said Mai's mother as she hugged her husband. Nobody noticed that the toddler had toddled away from them. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Aang was having no luck in trying to find Bumi. He did have a stroke of luck when he found Flopsy, Bumi's pet gorilla goat. Being the kind-hearted and caring boy that he is, he immediately freed Flopsy and used him to look again for Bumi. Location: Fire Nation Circus. The night show had just begun for the circus. It was a special show because Azula had decided to attend. She sat in the main seat, with Naruto sitting just off to the side. We are deeply honored to have the Fire Lord's daughter at our humble circus, announced the circus master loudly. Please tell us if there is anything that we can do to make sure that the show is more enjoyable. Azula began to say something but caught the warning in Naruto's eyes. That won't be necessary, she finally said. The performers went through their routines as both Naruto and Azula watched. Soon enough, it was Ty Lee's turn to perform. Incredible, do you think she'll fall? She asked the circus master as her friend did her act on the high rope. Of course not, he answered, confident in Ty Lee. She had never fallen before, why would she start now? Don't even think about it, Azula, Naruto whispered. I wasn't going to, she whispered back. She had made a promise, and she was going to stick with it. That is when things went a little haywire. Suddenly, every animal that the circus had somehow gotten loose and stampeded their way into the main tent. Ladies and gentlemen, we present to you, Pandemonium, the Kyuubi said grandly as he and his Jinchuriki watched the animals of the circus rampage around on the floor. Oh, shut up, now's not the time for that, Naruto silently told the fox as he stood up. Killjoy, the fox muttered. What's going on? Demanded the circus master. I don't know, sir. Somehow the beasts got out of their cages, one of the circus workers told him. I can see that. We have to get this under control now. Everyone hurried to contain the situation, but the stampeding animals could not be controlled. While Ty Lee was still up in the air in the middle of her act, the animals raged below. But then a sharp whistle blew, and they stopped. Everyone looked at the animals in confusion except for one person, and that person was who the animals were looking at with fear in their eyes. Everyone else began to feel some sort of pressure weighing down on them, like it was almost suffocating them. That is enough, Naruto told them, his voice becoming rougher and turning into a growl as he came onto the floor. As Azula watched her bodyguard approach the ring, for a moment she would have sworn she had seen a head of a large fox snarling behind him. As Naruto got closer to the animals, they began to shake in fear. As he stood there watching the animals, no one knew what he was going to do. He then simply raised an arm and pointed his finger at the entrance from where they came from. Move it, he ordered them. They quickly complied. After the animals had left in what could almost be called an organized stampede, the pressure had disappeared. What did you do? The circus master asked him with awe in his eyes but with fear in his voice. Naruto turned around to face him. I simply showed them who the alpha here was, he explained simply. He looked at Ty Lee and said, you can come down now. Location: Resistance Camp. Aang and Flopsy walked into the camp and saw Katara and Sokka come up to them along with Kurenai. Inside the camp, many soldiers sharpened their weapons and gathered enough arrows while sitting down in front of a small fire. In another section of the camp, the other resistance fighters who were not officially part of the Earth Kingdom's main army were being instructed on how to fight in an organized manner by a few Earth Kingdom officers. Some of the recruits who were benders were instructed to review their stances, while the non-benders were instructed on the proper usages of their chosen weapons. We looked everywhere, No Bumi, Aang told them. Seeing that he was sad, Katara gave him a hug. Sokka hesitated to telling the truth, but he still did. Well, what did you expect? Did you honestly think you would be able to find Bumi? He's the king of Omashu and a powerful earthbender as well. They're not going to keep him imprisoned out in the open. Knock it off, Sokka. Katara snapped at him, a scowl set firmly on her face. I'm just stating the facts, and the both of you know it, he replied, his scowl matching hers. Your brother is right, Kurenai told Katara before turning to face Aang. What you did was reckless and stupid. You could have been captured as you looked for your friend. How would that help him? You were okay with it the first time. Katara protested. Only because he wouldn't be going in alone. He had you two to help him, she replied, keeping her voice calm. Before Katara could protest again, Aang admitted the truth. Kurenai's right, Katara. I placed myself in danger when I looked for Bumi alone. It was a bad mistake. His downcast tone made Katara hug him again. Hearing a whine coming from Flopsy, Sokka turned around and gave the sad gorilla goat a hug as well. We got a problem, the resistance leader said as he walked up to them. We just did a head count. Oh no, did someone get left behind? Katara asked with worry. No, we have an extra. The leader pointed to Momo, who was desperately trying to get away from the toddler in Fire Nation clothes currently hanging on his neck. Location, Omashu. On the balcony of the governor's mansion, the governor's wife was sobbing her heart out in a chair with Mai standing next to her. As she watched her mother cry, Mai pulled out a hanky to give her so she could wipe her tears and blow her nose. So, the resistance has kidnapped my son, the governor stated as he looked out at the city. Everything's so clever, so tricky, just like their king Bumi. What do you want to do, sir? One of the guards asked. The governor just looked at him once, and then looked back towards the mountains. He was probably going to regret it, but he knew of a way to get his son back. Location, Fire Nation Circus. Azula stood in Ty Lee's changing room while she sat in front of her mirror. Every audience member who saw the animal stampede had quietly left the performance tent after the organizer of the show had announced that he would cancel the rest of the performance tonight, so his animal handlers can calm the animal performers down. That was an interesting show, Ty Lee commented as she took off her headpiece. I had nothing to do with that stampede. It could have happened at any time during the show, Azula told her. She had kept her promise, if you say so. She was skeptic. She knew Azula quite well and that was something she would do. Ty Lee, I swear on my most prized possession that the stampede was not my fault. The acrobat turned to face her. You swear, huh? Azula nodded. Alright then, I'll take your word. She was willing to take that risk. They were friends, after all. Hey, Azula? Asked the acrobat, her voice somewhat cautious. Yes? The Fire Nation princess asked her. You know how I always think that Naruto has two auras? Yeah, you told him that back when we first met him. He told you that he had no idea what you were talking about. They didn't really know him back then. But now, she was sure he had been lying. Well, when he told all the animals to leave, that second aura got bigger and, I swear to Agni, I saw a giant fox head right behind him. Wait, you saw the fox too? She had thought that she was the only one who saw it. Ty Lee nodded. Do you know what it means? She shook her head. No, I don't. Do you think we should ask Naruto about it? Only if we have to, Azula replied. She decided to change the subject. Are you ready to leave? Just give me a few minutes. Where are we going? Omashu. Location, Resistance Camp. Aang, Katara, Sokka, Kiba, Shino, Hinata, Kurenai and the Resistance leader all sat around a fire and watched the toddler as he went after Momo. He fell on his bottom as the flying lemur got away, but soon fell in front of Sokka's club. Before the toddler could touch it, Sokka grabbed and put it out of harm's way. Seeing his toy being taken away, the toddler began to cry. Katara looked at her brother with a frown and proceeded to hit him upside the head. I'm not giving back the club, Katara. It's a weapon, not a toy, he told her, earning him a glare. As he spoke, Akela padded over to the toddler and proceeded to lick his face and nuzzle him, making the child giggle. You're so cute, Katara said as she hugged the toddler and gave it a kiss on the cheek. Sure, he's cute now, but when he's older, he'll join the Fire Nation army, the Resistance leader said. You won't think he's so cute then, he'll be a killer. He had seen enough Fire Nation soldiers to know that was going to happen. Not if you and your generation decide to set a better example. The next generation learns from the old one, so it's up to us to teach them, Kurenai told him with firm conviction, her students nodding in agreement. Meanwhile, the toddler had wandered over to Hinata, crawled into her lap, and fell asleep. Hinata simply lifted the child up into her arms and began to rock him back and forth, humming a lullaby. You're going to be one heck of a mom, Hinata, Kiba told her after she had finished. Thanks, Kiba, she replied, blushing a little bit. I have a question, Shino announced out of the blue, getting everyone's attention. What is it, Shino? Kurenai asked. He didn't usually say things like that. Why is it that all the animals, besides the lemur, have started laughing? He pointed to Appa, Akamaru, Akela, and Flopsy, who did honestly look like they were laughing. That reminds me, how did Akela and Akamaru get along so well? The last time I checked, they were almost at each other's throats, Sokka asked Kiba. Don't know. When we arrived to make sure the civilians got here safely, we found all three of them asleep. The weird thing was that Akamaru was sleeping in top of Appa's head and Akela was sleeping on top of Akamaru. When we tried to wake them, they all growled at us in unison, the Inuzuka told him, shrugging in bafflement. Another friendship made in sacred snoring, the tribesman muttered before turning to Appa. Do you have some sort of weird power that makes everyone friends after they sleep on top of you? He asked the sky bison. Appa just rolled over onto his back and continued to laugh in his own, sky bison way. What's so funny, Akamaru? Kiba asked his dog. Akamaru told him, and when he was done, Kiba had busted out laughing as well. Okay, what exactly did he say, Kiba? Kurenai asked her student. Oh Kami, this is just too funny. He tried to say before he began laughing again. What is it? He had finally managed to catch his breath. Akamaru told me how the kid managed to get here. He started to tell the rest of them what had happened to Momo, while they were pretending to have pentapox. After he was done telling the story, everybody had managed to start laughing. As they laughed, Momo had somehow managed to look embarrassed. After everyone was done laughing, they heard the cry of a bird. Looking around, they saw one flying towards them. A messenger hawk is coming, said the resistance leader as it landed. Kurenai rose from where she sat, walked over to the hawk, opened the compartment, and took out the letter. After reading it over, she gave it to Aang. You should read this out loud to everyone, she told him. It's from the Fire Nation governor. He thinks we kidnapped his son, Aang told them as he read the letter. So, he wants to make a trade. His son, for King Bumi. At the last bit, his eyes went wide. Okay then, it's a trap, Sokka said. Just what I'd expected from you, said Katara as she looked at her brother. Nevertheless, Sokka is right. This sounds like a trap, Kurenai agreed. We need to think of something. Do you guys have any ideas? He asked Team Kurenai. Just like my brother, always coming up with plans, Katara said aloud. And look where they've got us. Sokka decided enough was enough. Katara, we need to talk. Alone. He rose and started to walk away from the group. His sister followed after him. What is that you wanted to talk about? Katara asked him once they were a good distance from the camp, far enough away so no could see or hear them. Sokka looked at her and asked, What's your problem, Katara? What do you mean? She asked, trying to sound innocent. But she was too annoyed and angry with him to make it properly work. Sokka was not convinced of Katara's feigned innocence. You have something against me. What is it? Don't have against you, Sokka. You're my brother after all, she growled sarcastically as her temper was beginning to shorten. Stop it, Katara! He shouted at her. You've been deliberately nasty, snide, snotty and any other kind of word that describes your attitude ever since Master Pakka started training me. So, I will ask again, what is your problem? And with that, her temper was lost. You know what, Sokka? You're right. I do have a problem with you. You decided to barge in on something that you shouldn't have been anywhere in the first. Sokka simply raised an eyebrow. Is this about me asking Master Pakka to train me? He is not your master. You don't have the right to call him that. What you did was sacrilege. You had no business trying to learn waterbending when you're not a bender yourself. I'm the bender in the family, not you. Katara screamed. The silence between the two grew moment by moment until Sokka quietly asked one thing. Are you truly that childish? The fury went out of Katara and was replaced by confusion. What? Do you really think that I went to Master Pakka to learn waterbending so I could make sure that you didn't have something that was your own? I went to Master Pakka so I can learn how to protect myself. Protect yourself? Why would you need to do that? You have your weapons and intelligence, she protested. She had never seen him without any of those, at least, not voluntarily. What do you think will happen in the middle of a battle if I lose weapons? I'm not a bender and the last time I checked, intelligence was not a weapon that can actually be used on a battlefield. I asked Master Pakka to teach me so I wouldn't end up dead. The volume of his voice rose as he kept talking. Katara took a step back as she listened to her brother, like she was about to hide from his voice. Dead? She asked, not really understanding what he was saying. Yes, dead. Maybe that's what you would like to see, huh, Katara? Do you want to see me on the battlefield, wounded as blood seeps from my body? Do you want to watch me as I slowly lose my life? Well, do you? He roared. She began to cry at that, images filling her head. Images she didn't want to see. No, I don't want that, please not that. We already lost Mom and we don't know if Dad is still alive. I don't want to lose you too. As her sobs began to lessen, Sokka let his anger dissipate and gave her a hug. Like you said, Katara, I'm not the bender in the family. You are, and that's the difference between us. Although I did learn the stances and sets for waterbending, I'm not a bender. He took a step back so he could look at her face. Are we good? Katara nodded as her tears stopped. We're good. Then we better get back to the others. We still need to come with a plan. The two of them walked back to where the resistance camp was. The tension between the two of them was all but gone. Aang took a moment to watch the sun rise before walking down to where Sokka, Katara, and Team Kurenai stood in front of Appa. Sokka kept a close eye on the view, waiting to see if the hostage will arrive along with his captors. Please remember that we are possibly going into a trap, Sokka told him as he scratched Akela's ear. I know, Aang replied. Are we ready? Kurenai asked, holding the sleeping toddler. Probably ready as we'll ever be, Kurenai-sensei, Shino answered her. Don't worry guys, this'll be easy, Kiba stated. Sokka turned to his sister. I like to state for the record that those words did not come out of my mouth. Duly noted, Katara answered, making them laugh a little and lose the tension that was in the air amongst them. Location, Omashu. Mai stood in front the entrance to the governor's mansion. She watched a group of Imperial firebenders carry the royal palanquin towards her. She didn't need to ask who was inside, she already knew who. As the palanquin was set down and Azula stepped out, she bowed. Please tell me you're here to kill me, she said with no emotion whatsoever. The two of them looked at each other for a moment, and then laughed. It's great to see you, Mai, Azula told her as she gave her a hug. The two of them broke apart, and Ty Lee gave Mai another hug, albeit a clingier one. I thought you ran off and joined the circus. You said it was your calling, Mai asked the acrobat. Well, Azula called a little louder, Ty Lee replied as she stepped back. Actually, Ty Lee, I think that call got lost in the noise made by the animals when they were going on a rampage, Naruto said as he joined the girls. Naruto, Mai greeted him with a small glare. Doom and gloom, Naruto replied with a smile. So how do you want to die this time? Suffocation, drowning, beheading, impalement, electrocution, strangulation? He asked her, listing the ways on his fingers. How does a knife through the heart sound to you? She asked before flinging out her hand and throwing a knife at him. It whizzed through the air and looked like it was going to embed itself in his eye. Sounds a bit dull if you asked me. If I wanted a dull and boring death, I would have settled for having my skin flayed off, or suffer from multiple small cuts, he answered as he caught the knife without taking his eyes off her. Mai scowled slightly before finally grinning and replying in an amused tone. It's always fun to have you around, Naruto. If the two of you are done, I can tell Mai why we're here, Azula told them as she stepped forward, and looked at both Mai and Ty Lee. I have a mission and need you both. Count me in. Mai automatically agreed. I'll take anything that'll get me out of this place. After we're done in Omashu, I'll tell the squad leader to head back to the Fire Nation, Naruto told Azula, who nodded in agreement. I guess I have to go talk to your father now? She asked Mai. She nodded. Lead the way. The governor, his wife, Mai, and Ty Lee sat in front of Azula as she sat in the governor's chair. Naruto was leaning against the wall next to the door, keeping guard to make sure no intruder would enter the governor's residence without any reason at all. I apologize, the governor told Azula. You've come to Omashu at a difficult time. At noon, we're making a trade with the resistance to get Tom Tom back. Yes, I'm so sorry to hear about your son, Azula said sarcastically, as her facial expressions turned serious. Really, what did you expect by just letting all the citizens leave? My father has trusted you with this city, and you've made a mess of things. Forgive me, princess, the governor pleaded as he bowed his head. His wife followed his example. You stay here, she told him. Mai will handle the hostage trade so you don't have a chance to mess it up. And there is no more Omashu. I'm renaming it in honor of my father. No, you're not. Naruto interrupted her harshly. Most of the people in the room looked at him with shocked silence. They didn't know of anyone who would so openly disagree with the princess, but the silence grew dangerous as she eyed her bodyguard. What did you say? She growled. He looked at the two Imperial firebenders who stood on each side of the chair. They took the subtle order and left quietly. Would you give us a few minutes? He asked the governor and his wife. They nodded and left the room as well. What in Agni's name do you mean I'm not renaming this city? Azula demanded as she took a few steps towards Naruto. You're not renaming this city for 2 reasons, he told her as he came off the wall and walked forward a few steps. 1. Names are important. What are you talking about? This is the city of Omashu. Its citizens are a part of the Earth Kingdom. He gestured widely to emphasize his point. They take pride in the fact they came from Omashu. You take away the name, and they can't take pride in where they are born or who they are, she scoffed. That's nonsense. To her, one name was good as another. If you say so, Mississippi Chunky Chunky Boom Boom. She just stood there as she digested what just came out of her bodyguard's mouth. Excuse me? She asked him in a soft, quiet voice. People who knew Azula would start looking for places that provided good cover at that voice and pray to Agni she wasn't coming their way. What? He asked, acting like he hadn't really said anything. What did you just call me? Oh, that? I called you by your new name, Chunky Chunky Boom Boom, a present girl of the Earth Kingdom, he answered, acting like it was nothing. Like hell it is. She bent a fireball past his head, hitting the wall harmlessly. My name is Azula, and I am the princess of the Fire Nation. He looked at her as he slowly walked up towards her, finally stopping just in front of her. So changing the name of something or someone else is fine, but changing your name, or where you're from, is not allowed? He asked quietly. You're damn right it is. She snarled, shoving her face into his. They looked at each other with their faces only inches away. Her eyes were angry while his were calm. What you just felt is what everyone feels when a name is taken from them. Surely you can empathize with them when they feel what you have felt just now, Naruto told her softly. Do you really want to do that to these people? Azula glared at him for a few minutes, before realizing what he said. She could see what he was talking about, and was about to cast away a name the people of the city held dear to their hearts, and thought nothing of it. Yet, she was almost about to attack him when he did the same to her. I guess not, she conceded, stepping away from him. It's a valuable lesson, Azula. You would have learned it sooner or later. He turned to the door. I'll go tell the governor that we're going to make the trade. Very well, she agreed. He started walking away. And Naruto, that name is never to be mentioned again. He turned to face her. Don't give me a reason to use it, he told her with a mischievous grin before turning back. Naruto? Called Ty Lee. You said you had 2 reasons, but you only explained one. What was the second? Naruto stopped and turned, looking sheepish. Yeah, sorry, forgot about that, he said as he scratched the back of his head. Well, what is the second reason? Mai asked. Now she was curious about it. The royal flaming asshole doesn't deserve be named after a diaper, much less a city. You know, some might call that treason. Azula noted dryly. While she wasn't sure of the number, she knew that there were only a brave few people who speak ill of her father candidly and get away with. Her uncle was obviously one of them, as he is considered family. Naruto, on the other hand, is another issue entirely. Naruto scoffed and told the 3 girls. The day he gets off his ass and actually fights in this war, I might start respecting him, and I stress the word might. He left the room at that. They waited at the base of a gigantic state of the Fire Lord. Aang with his hat on with Katara and Sokka behind him with Akela at Sokka's feet. Kurenai stood to his side, still holding the sleeping toddler while her team behind her. Soon enough, they saw the other party coming up the stairs. Team Kurenai silently analyzed the group coming towards them. They figured that while the 3 girls could be considered a threat, they could also be dealt with. It was the cloaked, hooded one that they couldn't figure out. To any shinobi worth their kunai, that little fact would put them on guard immediately. Strange, but that cloaked person smells familiar, Kiba thought as he stared. I can't place him though, Aang, Hinata whispered as her team can observe by how their would-be opponents walked. Be careful of them. These are not civilians, they're fighters. Understood, Aang whispered back, before turning to Kurenai. If this turns into a fight, how do you two want to this? She looked at him briefly before turning her attention to her team. Shino, keep them close by using your bugs while Kiba and Akamaru keep them occupied. Hinata, get in close and disable them using your Jukin. Katara, support Hinata with your waterbending, she ordered. That should take care of the 3 girls. What about the 4th person? The airbender asked, looking at the hooded person accompanying the girls. I'll take care of him, Sokka told everyone while Akela growled in agreement. Just be careful. That guy somehow smells familiar, Kiba told them. Can you tell who it is? Shino asked. If he smelt familiar to Kiba, odds are that they knew him and therefore knew how to fight him. But the Inuzuka shook his head. No, he just smells familiar, but I don't why. Alright then, be on guard with the cloaked one, Kurenai ordered. By the time their conversation was over, Mai's group was coming towards them. Mai's hand gave a little flick and up above, the iron coffin that held King Bumi began to lower. Hi everybody, called out the king of Omashu. That is a strange man, Kiba commented, Akamaru nodding in agreement. The man was locked up in a coffin that left only his head out for everyone to see, and yet, he was acting like this was nothing. You brought my brother? Mai asked as Bumi landed behind her and the others. She kept her voice calm and neutral, trying to betray anything. Kurenai showed the sleeping toddler, safe in her arms. He's here, we're ready to trade, Aang told them. I'm sorry, but a thought just occurred to me. Azula interrupted. She turned to Mai and asked, do you mind? Of course not, Princess Azula, she told the princess. Oh boy, here we go. The Kyuubi said in a suffering tone. Knock it off, Fox. We need to focus here, Naruto told him. Do you feel that? The Kyuubi was silent for a few seconds as he felt what his Jinchuriki had felt. Yeah, I do. You catch on quickly, Gaki, he said in praise. 3 years under your tutelage and fighting in a war makes learning quickly a necessity, the blonde told the fox before refocusing on the trade. We're trading a 2-year-old boy for a king, but not just any kind of king. A powerful earthbending king to boot. It just doesn't seem like a fair trade, does it? Azula asked, Bumi nodding in agreement. Mai looked at her brother as she thought it over. You're right, she answered, stepping forward. The deal's off. If she didn't get out of the city fast enough, she was going to hear about this from her parents. Well, of course the deal is off, Mai, the cloaked person announced as he walked past Mai, but he stopped about halfway towards the other group. The deal was off before the negotiation started. That voice sounds familiar, Team Kurenai thought. But where have I heard it before? What do you mean? Mai asked him. It's simple, really, he replied, keeping his gaze focused on the Avatar's group. We brought our piece to the table, they did not. What are talking about? He's right in here in my arms, Kurenai argued. She lifted the toddler up slightly so they could see him better. Is he now? The cloaked person asked, his voice slightly mocking. He snapped his fingers. As the sound of the snap echoed all around them, the toddler being held by Kurenai simply disappeared. Or were you hoping to get something for nothing? How did you? She had been caught off guard when she felt her chakra had been disrupted. But more so, she was shocked by the fact that someone from this side of the planet knew enough about chakra to effectively use it. If you're going to try and fool me with a genjutsu, do a better job next time, he told her, sounding annoyed and disappointed. How did you know it was a genjutsu? The person smirked at that. Why should I have to tell you? Azula noticed that he was having fun with all of this. It looked like he was trying to send them up the proverbial wall, and while she found it annoying that he did it with her, she found it amusing when he did it to anyone other than her. Who the hell are you? Kiba shouted, pointing his finger at the cloaked person, who simply was unfazed by his outburst. He couldn't help but chuckled. I guess the Inuzuka clan isn't as good at recognizing sense as they thought they are. How the hell do you know what clan I'm from? I don't even know you, he sighed. Such a shame. I would have thought you of all people would recognize who I am. He looked directly at Kiba. Isn't that right, Inuteam? Suddenly everything in the conversation came back to him. The fact the person knew about genjutsu, the fact he knew Kiba was from the Inuzuka clan, his voice, his scent, and the insult. There only one person who used that insult on him. His face and eyes widened at the realization of who he was talking to. It can't be. Naruto? He asked in a confused voice, making Team Kurenai look at him, and then look at the person in shock. Ding 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 ding. The Inu team gets it in one, Naruto announced out loud as he lowered his hood. Naruto turned to the tribesman and gave him a small nod. How are you doing, Sokka? I'm doing fine, Naruto, he answered. He wasn't sure why, but they had just slipped into a casual conversation. But I do have a question. Why are you wearing the hood? We already know who you are. He pointed to Aang and his sister. Actually, I had my hood up for 2 reasons. 1, the sun was glaring into my face, so I had it up to give me some shade, he explained. It seemed like the easiest explanation to give as he and the girls came up to the platform. However, there was another reason as well. And the second? Asked Sokka. To make sure that, on the off chance that some of my fangirls are here, they don't recognize me, he said, suppressing a small shudder at the mere prospect of it. Sokka looked a little confused. So, your fangirls won't recognize you? He repeated. It sounded quite ridiculous out loud. Naruto nodded and shuddered at the thought of them catching him. It's a scary but true. If one of my fangirls catches even one glimpse of me, I would be running for my life for quite some. By this time Kurenai had found her voice again. Naruto, is that really you? She asked him, almost not believing it. But he was right there, standing before them. And the delegation from Konoha has found their voices, he remarked sarcastically, making Ty Lee giggle while Mai and Azula smirked. What are you doing here? Your banishment was repealed. She and her team, as well as the others, had been looking for him ever since it had been repelled. And all this time, he had been on this side of the planet. And your point is? He asked her, sounding bored and uncaring. Why haven't you come back? Well, I wouldn't have heard about it if I was here for 3 years, now would I? His remark hit home. He wouldn't have heard about it if he hadn't been in the elemental countries. You can come home now, man. The charges were proven to be baseless, Kiba said with glee. He was looking to catching up with the blonde, and seeing how he had changed. But the next thing to come out of Naruto's mouth stunned the Inuzuka. So? He asked. Every member of Team Kurenai went still at those words. They had told him he could come home, and he made it sound like he didn't want to. Hey, Naruto? Called out Sokka, who took the silence as a moment to talk. Back in the Northern Water Tribe, we had a Fire Nation prisoner. He called me the paragon of the Water Tribes. He began to explain. Naruto's face brightened a little at those words. I take it that you found the medallion? Yeah, I did. The prisoner started calling me a paragon after I had shown it to him. So, what exactly is a paragon? Before Naruto could answer, Kiba interrupted. That's all you have to say? So, what are you talking about? Naruto asked with exasperation and annoyance, his face showing that. Can't you see I'm talking with someone? We have just told that your banishment has been lifted, and you can return to the village. Logically you would be happy to hear that, and would try to get back to the village as soon as you could, Shino said. He was sure that was how Naruto would have reacted at the news. Oh, buzz off, bug boy. The blonde waved him off, trying to get back to the conversation with Sokka. Naruto, please stop this, Hinata suddenly spoke up. Let's go home. Everyone has been waiting for you. You can be a shinobi again. The silence was almost deafening. Naruto said nothing as he thought over the conversation. To Team Kurenai, it looked he was about to accept their offer and their hopes raised. They were stunned when he simply laughed. You make it sound like I hate my current job, white eyes, he told her, earning a shocked gasp from her and warning growls from Kiba and Akamaru. You have also forgotten that the old hag did not actually banish me, I left. So that makes me a missing nin, therefore I don't have to go back. The bingo book would have listed the price of the bounty on my head, if Konoha paid attention to the fact that their ninja had just left without notifying the Hokage about it. I suppose that all of you would have been richly rewarded for capturing me in the first place, he finished smugly. You're coming with us, Naruto, Kurenai told him as her team got into their fighting stances. If you refuse to come willingly, then we will force you to come with us. They had looked for him for too long. They weren't going to stop just because he didn't want to come. She was confident that once he was back in Konoha, he would be back to normal. I like to see you try, he told them with a smirk. But before everything goes to hell in a handbasket, I like to finish my conversation with Sokka. He turned to the tribesman in question. I take it that you already studied waterbending? He was surprised by the blonde's words. How did you know that? He asked that. Your posture is relaxed but also ready to move at a moment's notice. Your sister also has the same posture, and I know she's a waterbender, he pointed out. Plus, you were up in the Northern Water Tribe for some. You were bound to learn it. Yeah, I've studied waterbending and a little of airbending, he admitted. He was traveling with the last airbender after all. That's good thinking on your part. Naruto complimented him with an acknowledging nod. Do you have any questions for me? Just one. What exactly is this medallion? He asked, pulling out his medallion. Naruto would have answered, but he noticed Team Kurenai. Sorry Sokka, but I'm gonna have to tell you later, your protectors are spoiling for a fight. He gestured to the shinobi team to emphasize his point before turning to Azula. Do you mind if I have a little fun, princess? It makes no difference to me, she answered, shrugging her shoulders. While she kept a collected posture and expression on the outside, on the inside she was getting excited. It was always entertaining to see her bodyguard fight, at least when it wasn't her fighting him. Things are different now, Naruto. We're not genin anymore and you haven't had a teacher in the past 3 years, Kiba told him. He and his teammates had trained hard in the past 3 years. Who says I didn't have a teacher? Naruto asked as he undid the clasp on his cloak and pulled it off. Underneath the cloak, he wore a brown shirt underneath a black vest that was tied off at the waist with a steel-colored cloth belt. His pants a dark red color. He wore boots but didn't tuck the legs of his pants into them. He had a jian slung across his back, but to others it seemed odd how he had done it. He had slung it so that the handle of the sword was pointing to the ground, just under his left arm, while the scabbard jutted out into the air from behind his right shoulder. His appearance made no attempt to hide the muscles he clearly had, causing Katara and Hinata to involuntarily blush. Despite having seen it before, Ty Lee and Azula also sported blushes. Azula was able to hide hers better, but not by much. Sokka, allow me to show you a simple earthbending trick that paragons can use. Think of it as a lesson. He took a strip of cloth from his pocket and tied it around his eyes. Now then, let's begin. At that point, Kurenai had disappeared and suddenly, tree roots sprang up from the platform, grew quickly, and coiled around Naruto. Soon enough, he was pinned against a tree with two roots holding him. He did not struggle against the roots as everyone watched him. Azula, Ty Lee, and Mai with worry, Team Kurenai with satisfaction, and Aang, Sokka, Katara, and Akela with curiosity. It's over, Naruto, Kurenai said as she appeared out of the tree above him. If she was honest, she was a little disappointed. She had hoped he would put up more of a fight. However, she didn't dwell on it. Instead, she drew her fist back. But before she could knock him unconscious with the fist, he made a fist of his own with his right hand and slammed it into her face, tearing through the roots that held him in the process. If you're going to hold me with genjutsu, Kurenai, at least try. That was pathetic at best, he told her as the genjutsu failed. He had been hoping for a little more but was so far disappointed. With any luck, that wasn't their best, he thought as he waited. She recovered and leapt back over to where her team was. He broke a B-rank genjutsu like it was nothing, and he didn't even see me. She thought to herself in surprise. Apparently, he had changed in the past 3 years. But she had no time to worry as she quickly gave orders to her team. Kiba, Shino, Hinata, containment formation. If a solo attack wouldn't work, teamwork would definitely do it. Understood, Kurenai-sensei, replied Shino. Team Kurenai had used this formation before. Kiba and Akamaru would engage the target, but not to beat him. They would just wear him down. Meanwhile, Hinata would get in close and use her Juken to hit the target's Tenketsu. After the target's chakra was cut off, Shino would hold him down with his Kikeichu while Kurenai would apply a genjutsu on the target, subduing him. Let's go, Akamaru. Kiba leapt at Naruto with Akamaru on his side. Getsuga, Fong over Fong. The two of them started twisting around, spinning faster and faster until they looked like small, gray tornadoes. As they hurtled towards Naruto, he did nothing but wait. When it looked like they were about to hit him, he simply knelt, letting them pass each other overhead. Crap! We missed, Kiba thought. Both he and Akamaru tried to do a U-turn in midair so they could try to hit Naruto again, but it was an idea only. As both Kiba and Akamaru passed over Naruto, he whipped out his arms and plunged his hands into the two tornadoes, quickly grabbing Akamaru's tail and Kiba's leg. Tossing Akamaru up into the air, he swung Kiba down and punched him in hard in the stomach. The Inuzuka's breath was taken right out from him, and he tried to keep his last meal down, especially when he crashed into the platform. That slowed him down enough for Naruto to take advantage of. The blonde stood back up and kicked him back over to his teammates. He then jumped upwards, and roundhouse kicked Akamaru in the side, causing him to crash back into the ground in front of Kiba. Still the same, Ina team, always rushing into a fight, stated Naruto as he landed on the ground. He was a harder fight back in the Chunin exams, he thought. The difference here is that you already know how he fights, the Kyuubi reminded him. And he doesn't know how I fight now, he replied. That was when he felt his legs somehow go numb. When he sensed the bugs, he knew who was trying to attack him. Trying to hold me with your Kikeichu, Shino? He asked aloud. Shino said nothing. That way he wouldn't let Naruto find out that he had moved closer and off to the side a little. Not talking so that you'll hope I won't find out that you've changed your position. Shino was surprised by Naruto's question. How did he know? I was completely silent as I moved, and I did it while he was occupied with Kiba, he thought. Points for trying, but the blonde disappeared with a smoke plume. In his place was a piece of lumber from a nearby pile. He used a kawarimi, body replacement. Shino quickly spun around to try to find where Naruto had gone to, only to see his covered eyes looking at him. You still fail, he said before decking Shino. He kicked him back towards his teammates, dissatisfied with their lack of effort. That's 3 down. I'm not impressed. Sensing the incoming attack, he leaned back to avoid Hinata's fist and remarked mostly to himself, while trying to avoid having his tenketsu closed, and now it's miss. White eyes turned to subdue me. Please Naruto, just stop. I don't want to this, Hinata said as she attacked, her old stutter coming back. She had worked hard to get rid of that stutter, but it sometimes popped up when she didn't need it, like now, for instance. He said in a disbelieving tone as he kept avoiding her strikes. Even though it had been 3 years since he went up against the fighting style of the Hyuga clan, he remembered enough of it to completely avoid her strikes. Please, Naruto. Stop this. I don't want to fight you. If anything, she wanted him to stop all this and come back with them. In that case, please hold still so I could beat you, he replied. But he didn't strike back. He just kept avoiding her strikes with ease. Hinata didn't say any more, she just kept trying to hit him with her jukin but she kept missing. Naruto stayed just out of her reach by ducking, weaving and dodging. As Katara watched the fight, she realized something. He's moving like an airbender. When she looked over at Aang, she could see that he had realized it too. Sounds like your friends are about to join us again, Naruto commented, making Hinata take a quick glance behind and saw that her team was about to rejoin the fight. Taking advantage of her distraction, he swept her legs out from under her, making her fall. Moving quickly, he grabbed her hair and pulled it back, exposing her throat which he grabbed tightly with his other hand. Move and she dies. He barked out, his hand beginning to tighten around her throat. The rest of Team Kurenai stopped cold. Let her go, Naruto, Kiba demanded. It was probably a redundant thing to say, but it wasn't the time to think of things like that. No, the blonde replied shortly. You won't do this, Naruto, Kurenai told him. Despite what you think, you're not a killer. And how would you know I'm not a killer? Naruto asked as he continued to tighten his grip, slowly suffocating Hinata. The Konoha Jonin smiled. Despite everything that had just happened, she was still sure she knew him. Because you're Naruto Uzumaki, and you would never hurt your friends. Naruto sighed and released his grip, allowing Hinata to breathe again. Just when they thought he was about to let her go, he spoke. Mai, could I please borrow one of your knives? She took out one of her many knives and threw it to him. He caught it in the air, and said thank you. Mai simply gave a nod as Naruto plunged her borrowed knife into Hinata's stomach. The other side looked on in horror at what they had just witnessed. All of them flinched as they heard Hinata scream while Azula, Mai, and Tai Li let nothing show. What are you screaming about? Naruto asked her derisively as she stopped screaming. I didn't stab anything critical. However, if I were to drag this to your left. He pulled the knife lightly in that direction, making Hinata gasp in pain. I would tear open your liver and that would kill you. Naruto, you bastard! Yelled an outraged Kiba. He would have done something if his teammate wasn't being held hostage. Oh, relax. I'm not going to kill her like that. He pulled the knife out of her and tossed it back to Mai, who wiped it clean and sheathed it. It takes too long. He formed a Rasengan with one hand and asked, have you ever seen what a Rasengan does to a face? It's not pretty. Perhaps I should show you what it does. He brought the Rasengan closer to Hinata's face. The swirling edge of the blue orb seemed to hover an inch before her cheek. Alright, Naruto, you win. Just don't do it, Kurenai begged, knowing that they were defeated. What do you want us to do? That's simple. Turn around and leave. The king stays with us, he ordered, still holding the Rasengan close to his hostage's face. What about Hinata? I will let Hinata go so that we know one of us can act in good faith, he replied, reminding her of her failed genjutsu attempt. What happened to you, Naruto? She asked. What happened to that kid who would shout about being Hokage one day? What happened to the kid that we all cared about? He grew up. Spending 3 years fighting in a war and protecting someone from assassinations will do that to a person. He released Hinata and let the Rasengan fade away. As soon as she felt his grip leave, she ran back to her team. That kid died the moment that Konoha made it clear that he was no longer wanted. As soon as Hinata reached her, Kurenai turned to face Aang and the others. We're leaving, she stated. But what about Bumi? Asked Aang. We can't just leave him, can we? His friend was right there, within easy reach. They couldn't just leave him there. You knew this could happen, Aang. We took a gamble and we lost, Sokka told him. Right now, it's best if we get out of here. If they didn't, things might get even worse. That was very nicely done, Naruto. You did well against them, Azula told him as he rejoined them. It wasn't hard. They were predictable, that's all. I faced tougher enemies out on the battlefields, he replied as he took the cloth off his eyes. He was a little disappointed with their performance against him. He would have thought they would get better in 3 years. But that was not the case here. He wasn't sure if they did not know how to deal with him, or if it was because of what he had been through in the last 3 years. Mai gave a signal, and the iron coffin holding Bumi was being taken back up. "See you all later," he called out as he gave off a mad laugh. Aang watched as his friend was being pulled upwards. He couldn't take it anymore. He had to save his friend. "Bumi!" he shouted as he raced across the platform. "Get back here, Aang!" Sokka called out to the airbender. Aang ignored him as he leapt up the scaffolding and then off it. As he opened his glider and began to fly, his hat came off, showing his arrow tattoo. As they watched this whole spectacle, Naruto simply turned to Azula. "I told you it was going to be him," he said. "Yes, you did," Azula replied. "And now, it's my lucky day." She raced up the scaffolding after her target. "Well, I've had my share of fun." Naruto turned around and started to walk away. "It's your turn, girls," he told Mai and Ty Lee, who rushed towards Sokka and the others. "We need to get out of here," Katara said as she readied herself for a fight. Sokka was already blowing on the bison-shaped whistle that was always carried by one of them. "Way ahead of ya," he told her. He looked at Team Kurenai, which was still in a bit of a mess. "Can you guys move?" he asked them. "Yeah, we can," Kurenai answered. They might have been hurt, but they could move. "We need to get out of here and you guys have already fought, so it's our turn. Katara, give us some cover while I get them out." "Akela, stay with Katara and help her out," Sokka ordered. Katara didn't argue. "Akamaru, you do the same but stay close to her," Kiba told his partner, who barked in acknowledgement. As they tried to get to the ladder, Sokka was tripped by a fist coming up from under the platform. He skidded to the edge but stopped just as his head was hanging out over the edge, which Shino and Kurenai pulled him away from. Jumping out from a hole in the platform, Ty Lee went after him. Katara was about to stop her when Mai flung a couple of knives at her. She quickly bent her water to tear off some of the wooden planks on the platform. They leapt up just in time to block the knives. Using her water, Katara shoved the planks back at Mai before bending her water into a whip and throwing it at Ty Lee. Grabbing her ankle, she quickly dragged the acrobat back, allowing Sokka and the others to escape. Then they heard a yell coming from above. Bumi's iron coffin, with Aang on it, fell past them. Taking notice of where they were going to land, one of the many slides of Omashu, Aang acted quickly and bent the air below them into a cushion so that they landed safely on the slide. Azula watched them speed away for a second before jumping into a cart and going after them. "Just like old times, isn't it, Bumi?" Aang asked as they flew down the slide. He couldn't help but laugh in excitement at it. "Aang, I need to talk to you," Bumi shouted, but the wind muffled his words so Aang heard something a little different. "It's good to see you too," he replied. Then he noticed that Azula had caught up with them. Meanwhile, Katara was fighting against Mai. Akamaru and Akela were keeping a close guard around her so that Mai couldn't get close, and Ty Lee had disappeared from her sight. She bent her water while Mai used projectiles. After bending backwards to avoid a water whip, Mai shot a needle from her ankle holster. Katara quickly formed her water into ice to block the needle, and Mai used that to charge forward. Katara melted the ice back into water and shot at Mai, who had just flung her arm in a throwing motion. The water engulfed her arm and hardened back into ice, effectively trapping her arm. However, Katara's victory was short-lived. Ty Lee appeared from behind and rushed Katara, sweeping the legs out from under Akela and Akamaru in the process. Taking advantage of the Water Tribe girl's surprise, she jabbed several points in Katara's arms before leaping away to Mai's side. Once that happened, the ice surrounding Mai's arm melted and fell on the ground. Not sure what exactly had happened, Katara tried to bend the water, only for it to rise sluggishly and then fall down again. "How are you going to fight without your bending?" Mai asked mockingly, pulling out a three-bladed knife. But before she could throw the knife, it was knocked out of her hand by Sokka's boomerang. "I seem to manage," the tribesman declared from atop of Appa. The sky bison quickly landed in front of the two girls and blasted air at them so hard that they flew away. Katara as well as the dogs quickly got on board after that. Katara joined her brother on Appa's head while Akela and Akamaru joined Team Kurenai in the saddle. Soon enough, Appa flying down the city with everyone on board looking for Aang. Katara saw him first. "There he is," she said, pointing to a particular slide. "We can catch him." Sokka brought Appa down closer to the slide while Aang was trying to defend himself from Azula's fire. "Hang on, Bumi. Our ride's here," the air nomad told his friend. As Appa got right alongside the slide, Aang bent the air to lift Bumi's iron coffin up over Appa. Sokka and Katara tried to grab hold and bring it down, but it sailed over their heads. Both Aang and Bumi smashed through a different slide before landing in the first one again. Azula quickly bent her fire into a wheel and sent it after them. Watching the fire wheel come after them, Bumi gave a grunt of effort and lifted his chin, causing a small column of rock to shoot up from the slide and stop the fire. It was also giving them the bonus of stopping Azula by smashing her cart into it, making her jump out of it and land on her feet. After skidding to a stop on the slide, she watched the two of them race away. "You could earthbend? All along?" asked a stunned Aang. He couldn't believe that his friend could do something like that. "Well, they didn't cover my face," King Bumi replied. As they got near the end of the slide, he moved his chin and caused another column to shoot up at the end. Aang jumped off as the iron coffin landed on top of the column. "I don't understand. Why didn't you free yourself? Why did you surrender when Omashu was invaded? What's the matter with you, Bumi?" Aang demanded. He had a lot of questions, and he wanted them to be answered. "Listen to me, Aang. There are options in fighting called Jing. It's a choice of how you direct your energy," Bumi told him. "I know. There's positive Jing when you're attacking and negative Jing when you're retreating," Aang told him, sounding a bit like a little know-it-all brat. "And neutral Jing when you do nothing," exclaimed the king of Omashu. That he did not know. There are 3 Jings? Well, technically there are 85, but let's just focus on the third. Neutral Jing is the key to earthbending. It involves listening and waiting for the right moment to strike, he explained. "That's why you surrendered," Aang said, realizing what his old friend had done. "Isn't it? Well, I also surrendered because that youngster Naruto asked so nicely. But it's also the reason why I can't leave now." When he heard that, the Avatar became disheartened. "I guess I need to find someone else to teach me earthbending," he said as he turned away from his old friend. "Your teacher will be someone who has mastered neutral Jing. You need to find someone who waits and listens before striking," Bumi assured him. Out of nowhere, Momo landed on Aang's shoulder, making him turn to face Bumi again. "Hey, Momo," he greeted the lemur, happy to see him again. Momo's mastered a few Jings himself, Bumi noted, earning a screech from the lemur. "Goodbye, Aang. I'll see you when the time is right." He pushed his coffin back onto the slide and bent the rock to push him back up the slide, laughing madly all the way. As he watched his friend disappear, Aang saw Appa arrive. The atmosphere was a little tense as they headed back to the resistance camp. No one really talked to Aang, who finally decided to break the silence. "Are you all mad with me?" he asked them. "We're not mad, we're disappointed," Sokka answered, making him a bit nervous. "We will talk about this later," Kurenai told them. "For now, let's get back to the resistance." They all nodded in agreement and let Appa continue his flight. The silence had returned and now, it was beginning to make the flight seem longer. No one said a word, which didn't help Aang's nerves. When they landed just outside of the camp, they noticed that it was too quiet. "They should have noticed us landing," Sokka noted. "A landing sky bison did tend to make some noise. Let's move quickly, something might have happened," Kurenai ordered. They hurried to the camp, and when they saw what had happened, they didn't like it. All the civilians were gagged and bound. All the warriors and earthbenders were all on the ground and not moving. And sitting on a rock in the middle of the camp, and playing with the toddler, was Naruto. "It took you guys long enough," he said when he looked up and noticed them. "What did you do, Naruto?" Hinata asked in shock, looking around at everyone there. "Huh? Oh, you mean them?" He gestured to the people on the ground with a free hand, which soon went back to playing with the toddler. "Don't worry, they're only unconscious. By the way, my congratulations to you," Kurenai the blonde said to her. "Congratulations?" She was suspicious of those words, as she didn't know what he meant. "When you trapped me in that genjutsu, I looked for your chakra so I would know where to attack. I was quite surprised when I found you. Now that I think about it, you looked like you're almost glowing. I'm just surprised that Inu team here hasn't figured it out yet." He pointed to Kiba with a free thumb. "Care to explain by what you said, you bastard?" Kiba growled, insulted about his smelling ability being derided. The blonde ignored him, focusing on the toddler in his lap. "Why are you here?" Katara asked with caution, figuring that it was now best to trend with caution with him. "I'm just here to get Tom Tom here," he answered, bouncing the toddler on his knee, making him giggle. "Also, to finish my conversation with Sokka, as we were kind of interrupted last time." "Okay, what is this thing and what do these symbols mean?" He showed Naruto the medallion again. "That's an easy one. It's the medallion of the paragon of the water tribe. It shows that the person who wears it is a paragon. There are only 4 paragon medallions." He reached into his shirt with a free hand and drew out a similar medallion. The difference between the two was the pattern. The top of Naruto's medallion had the right side triangle, while Sokka's had the upside down triangle on the top. "Well, what do the symbols mean?" Sokka asked again. "They are the ancient symbols for the 4 elements. Yours starts at the top with water and goes clockwise with earth, fire and air, the blonde explained. Sokka took a closer look at Naruto's medallion. I'm guessing that yours is fire, air, water and earth. You catch on quick. Sokka continued with his questions. Why did you make me a paragon? Because when I met you, you had the 2 requirements that were needed to become a paragon. His answer was short and yet confusing. What does that mean? The first requirement is easy, but the second one is a little more difficult, he told the tribesman. Now he was even more confused but went with it. What's the first requirement? Simple. You're not a bender. The collective word that everyone said was, huh. When he saw how confused they were, the blonde clarified for them. To have even the chance of being a paragon, you cannot be a bender. Sokka decided to continue with the questions. What's the second requirement? Naruto smiled and answered, the guts to never give up. That didn't make enough sense to him, so he had to say it. What? Think of it like this. Back in the Northern Water Tribe, if I had continued walking to get Aang, what would you have done? He asked. I would have fought you myself, the tribesman answered without hesitation. Even if you knew I could have easily killed you, you were going after one of my friends. If I was going to die, then I might as well take you down with me, he told the blonde, and he meant every word of it. He protected both his friends and his family fiercely. Naruto's smile turned into a full-blown grin. Excellent answer. That's why you're a paragon. Okay. I only have one question left. Sokka told him. What does a paragon do? Basically, we keep an eye on him. The blonde pointed at Aang. Me? Why me? Asked the airbender in surprise. He looked at the air nomad with a curious gaze, and asked, Let me ask you something, Avatar Aang. Have you ever heard about avatars that have gone power mad or just insane? No, because that would never happen. The avatar was there to bring peace and balance to the 4 countries, not rule over them. No avatar would do that, he was sure of it. He laughed at that. You've never heard of them because every time an avatar has gone mad or tries to conquer the planet, the paragons have stepped in. What are you talking about? Aang asked, uncomfortable with what the blonde had already said. The 4 paragons are there to watch and monitor the avatar in case he does go mad with power or just lose his sanity. When that happens, the paragons will kill the avatar, Naruto answered, keeping it short and to the point. No one said a word as the information went through their heads. Sokka was the first to recover, remembering something that had happened to him. Paragons also have a power over the avatar state, don't they? He asked Naruto. He nodded. Yes, they do. A paragon can cut the link between the avatar and the avatar state. I'm guessing you've already used that ability? Sokka nodded. Well, that's all the time I have for you, now I must be going. Naruto told them as he stood up from the rock with Tom Tom in his arms. Where do you think you're going, Naruto? Shino asked him. I'm leaving, isn't it obvious? And you do think you can go? You are surrounded, and you have just been in battle. You are tried and you plan to leave with someone. It is logical for you to surrender now. Naruto gave a mischievous grin. 2 things, bug boy, he told Shino. Number 1, I barely broke a sweat when I fought you guys. Number 2, remember when I said that you were trying to get something for nothing? Before they could answer, both he and Tom Tom disappeared with poof. As they waved the smoke that was left, they saw a note left on the rock. Sokka picked it up and read aloud to the group. I guess I'm better than you when it comes to that. Naruto. Aang looked around at everyone. What do we do now? He was still stunned by the fact that he apparently had a group of people who would kill him if he made a mistake. Once he realized that, he couldn't help but remember that spirit he met at Fong's fortress. Let's get the civilians untied and wake up the warriors and earthbenders, Sokka decided for them. After that, we leave Omashu fast. In the meantime, my team and I need to make a report, Kurenai said, turning to her team. Lady Tsunade must be told of what has happened. Location, Omashu. Azula sat within the palanquin as Mai and Ty Lee walked beside it. So we're tracking down your brother and uncle, huh? Mai asked. It'll be interesting seeing Zuko again, won't it, Mai? Ty Lee's eyes had a slight mischievous glint in them as she looked at her friend. Mai looked away and smiled for an answer. It's not just Zuko and Iroh anymore, Azula told the 2 of them. We have a 3rd target now. They walked in silence for a little bit before Mai asked another question. Where's Naruto? She didn't see the blonde anywhere nearby. He told me that he was going to see your parents. He'll meet us at the camp, Azula replied. The governor held his wife as they stood on the balcony, looking sadly out to the mountains, which they could still see in the evening light. Although Omashu became peaceful with the resistance's sudden departure, as well as the civilians who went with them, it was a little too quiet for the governor's comfort. The governor's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of someone knocking on the door. My lord, Lord Naruto would like to speak with you, a guard spoke from behind them. Bring him forward, the governor told the guard. Even though he didn't want to speak one could not casually refuse Princess Azula's guard, especially if he had some important message to deliver, or a request to make. They soon heard footsteps coming up behind them. Naruto greeted the two of them. My lord and lady. They didn't turn around to look at him. What is it that you want? He asked. I brought you something that I think you would like, Naruto replied casually. What is it? He and his wife heard a cooing sound they knew very well. Quickly turning around, they saw Tom Tom in Naruto's arms. There they are, the blonde said to Tom Tom as he knelt and placed the toddler on the ground. When he noticed that his parents were there, he began to walk toward them, cooing at them. Tom Tom! Cried his mother as she rushed forward, picked him, and hugged him. The governor enfolded them both in a hug of his own. Thank you so much, he said as tears ran freely down his face. Naruto smiled as he bowed his head. It was nothing, he told them as he walked past them to the edge of the balcony. I'll be sure to tell Mai that her brother is safe, he assured them before jumping over the railing and into the night, leaving the reunited family to enjoy this moment. Location: Azula's camp. He walked into a newly created campsite and noticed Mai and Tai Li were sitting at the fire. Although it was not as big as the Resistance's camp that he came across, it was enough to hold up to 4 people. Hey cutie, Tai Li chirped when she saw him walk up to them. Hey Tai Li, he greeted back. He looked over at Mai. I got something to tell you, doom and gloom. What is it? Mai asked him, acting like she didn't care. Your brother is back with your parents. When she heard those words, a rare smile came onto her face. Thank Agni for that, she said in relief. He looked at her like she had just done something weird. Did you just use an emotion? Mai's warm expression turned cold quickly as she began to finger a knife. Don't push your luck, she warned him. I'm certain I can hit you from here. All right, he said, putting his hands in mock surrender. When she stopped fingering the knife, he put his hands down. I take it she's in her tent? He asked Tai Li. She nodded. Yeah, she is. They both looked over at the biggest tent in the camp. It wasn't a huge tent, but it was still the biggest. Thanks, he told her before walking over to the tent. He could hear the sounds coming from the fire reaching out to his eyes. It was still there when he stood in front of the tent flap. When he stepped in, he saw Azula sitting in a meditative pose in front of 3 candles. It was only when she looked up to see Naruto enter her tent did she pause her meditation. So you're back, she said while breathing in and out. As she did, the fires on the candles raised and lowered with her breathing. Yeah, I am. He stayed silent for a few minutes as he watched her breathe in and out. You know, it's been a while since I've seen you do that exercise, he finally commented, breaking the silence. It was one of the things that all those firebender teachers kept pounding into my head. No matter who she had, they always told her the same thing. He gave a small smile. Never forget the basics, he recited, having been there for some of her lessons. She nodded her head in agreement and continued the exercise. Again, he stayed silent for a few minutes before realizing that she was worried about something. What's worrying you, Azula? She stopped the exercise but didn't turn to face him. Naruto noticed the anxious look on her face, but he simply smiled. I have both of my friends here with me, but I still don't have my answer. What if I never find it? That little thought made her worry. If there is one thing Azula did not like, it was to worry about minor things that may become major issues. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning around, she saw him standing behind her. Don't worry. This is one of those things that take time. You just need to have some patience, all right? He told her, assuring her with an easy smile. She nodded. He removed his hand from her shoulder and stepped back. All right then. Have you decided who to go after? He asked. His tone grew more serious. Yes, we're going after the Avatar, she answered. Going after him would be much better than going after her disgraced brother and uncle. Understood, he replied, not batting an eyelash at what she said. I took the liberty of requesting 3 mongoose dragons from Omashu. They should be here in the morning. 3? She asked, turning to face him with a raised eyebrow. Yes, for you, Tai Li and Mai. Where's the 4th one? What do you mean? The blonde asked, confused by what she meant. I highly doubt that you will be able to stay with us if you're not riding one as well, she pointed out. Mongoose dragons were among the fastest animals she knew about. He grinned. Princess, if anything, those mongoose dragons will have to take rest periods in order to stay with me at my top speed. He turned around. I'll see to it that the squad goes back to Omashu before leaving for the Fire Nation. Naruto, she said, stopping him at the tent flap. Those people today, the ones that were shocked to see you. Who are they? She knew that they knew him in some way, but that was it. My past, he answered shortly before leaving the tent. What are you hiding from me, Naruto? She thought to herself. Deciding to think about it, she went back to her exercise. You're going to tell her who they are sooner or later, kid, the QB told his Jinchuriki as the blonde went to set up his sleeping bag. I know, QB. I just hope it's later, he mentally replied. Location, Konoha. Kami, do I need a drink? Tsunade said aloud as she went through the paperwork on her desk. She pushed back away from her desk and looked out the window. The afternoon sun shined down on the village, sometimes getting obscured by the occasional cloud. All in all, it was a perfect day. It's times like these that make me think of him, she thought, remembering a certain blonde. Where are you, Naruto? Lady Tsunade! Shizen yelled from the hallway, bursting through the doors. What's the matter, Shizen? She asked, worried that something had happened. Her apprentice held out a scroll for her. This just came through the transport seal. It's from Kurenai's team and was marked urgent. Tsunade took the scroll, opened it, and began reading. After a few minutes, she looked up. Shizen, get Team Asuma and Team Guy in here, ASAP, she ordered. Them? They just got back from a mission, why do you need them now? She simply showed her the open scroll. She stood completely still, reading and rereading the first sentence. I'll go get them right away. She left the office fast. Tsunade put the scroll down and reached for her hidden stash of sake. That first sentence stayed fresh in her mind. Lady Tsunade, Naruto Uzumaki has been found.